Thank you. Good evening. I'm going to call the Board of Selectmen's meeting for October 3rd, 2022 to order. We are going to go into executive session in a moment. And after going into executive session, we will return to open session no later than 6 p.m. Larry?
We move to executive session, A, pursuant of MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss with respect to collective bargaining for all town unions, and the chair has determined that open session will have a detrimental effect on the town's bargaining position. B, pursuant to MGL Chapter 30A, 21A7, to comply with or act under the authority of any general or spatial law or federal grant and aid requirements. Quoted as Purpose 7. The open meeting law, GL 38 22FG, to review, approve, and or discuss the possible release of executive session minutes dated August 8, 2022, August 16, 2022, August 22, 2022, and September 6, 2022, and September 19,
Thank you.
2022. Paragraph C, pursuant to MGL Chapter 30A, 21A, Chapter A3, to discuss strategy with respect to potential litigation concerning the catch basin and drainage contract. The chair has declared that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the town.
Second?
Oh, sorry. Second.
That's okay. It's been moved and seconded to go into executive session as read. Roll call vote. Larry?
Aye.
Julie?
Aye.
And I am an aye. 3-0, it is a vote, and I so declare. Thank you. Good evening. I'm going to call the Board of Selectmen's meeting for October 3rd, 2022 back to order. We started tonight's meeting at 5 p.m. in executive session where we discussed 3 topics. First was collective bargaining for all town unions. If the chair determined that an open session would have a detrimental effect on the town's bargaining position, which I did. No decisions were made. It was really more of an update. Second was to approve executive session minutes for August 8th, 2022, August 16, 2022, August 22, 2022, September 6, 22, and September 19th, 22. We did approve those minutes. We did not approve the release of those minutes. And then last, to discuss strategy with respect to potential litigation concerning the catch basin and drainage contract. If the chair declared that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the town. There was an action taken in that. We will not announce that action now, as that's still open and still being discussed. With that, would you join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Public comment announcement. I will do the first one, which is the next Board of Selectmen meeting will be Tuesday, October 11th, 2022 at 6 p.m. in this room. The next one is committee vacancies. In tonight's packet, we have our committee vacancies. We did discuss announcing that weekly until we fill those 30 positions. So there is a vacancy list in the packet if you know anyone interested, or if anyone's at home that's interested. We have 30 vacancies on committees that we would love to fill. Anyone else for public comment and announcement?
Hi, Carolyn Carey, Community Center Director, and I just wanted to remind everyone that this Saturday, October 8th, from 11 to 2, we'll be having our Touch a Truck event in the recreation side of the Community Center parking lot. In addition, 11 to 12, inside the gym is a free Zumba class as part of our Try It, You Might Like It series. And just because I'm here, I'm going to remind everyone that the Try It, You Might Like It for October is on technology, and we're excited to be partnering with the library staff and with the Monomoy school staff for October 12th, October 19th. We have 2 sessions on that day. So just a reminder. Also, our boutique with free costumes is starting up in the following week, so please come on in. We have gotten quite a few dropped off, and we're accepting candy donations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Ginny Hewitt, Library Director at Brooks Free Library, and I wanted to make a few announcements as well. On Tuesday, October 18th, the library's hosting a information session and question and answer program on accessory dwelling units with the Lower Cape CDP. They're going to provide information about the technical assistance they provide concerning building and zoning requirements for ADUs, guidance on the permitting process, and financial incentives that exist. This program will, it's free, open to the public, no registration. We have a whole series of ongoing programs. We have a morning book group and 2 evening book groups, and a weekly knit-lit program on Wednesdays at 12:30. So if you're new to the community or just feeling a little more isolated than you like, or maybe you're just tired of your social circle and want to meet new people, it's a good opportunity to connect with other people and get to know them. We have some special, Halloween season's upon us, so we have several spooky-themed programs this month. The first is Saturday at 2, a talk on Cape Cod lore with Don Wilding. It's mysterious stories and legends of Cape Cod involving ghosts, pirates, witches, mystical dunes, which is something I never heard of, mystical dunes, and other tall tales. On Thursday, October 20th, there's an online event, If the Broom Fits. It's a Halloween, about Halloween and the history of witches. On Friday, October 28th at 5, we have an in-person event, Introduction to Tarot, and that is an all-ages program, so everyone's welcome. We'll be providing pizza, so we're asking people to register if they would like pizza so that we can get enough food. The Friends of Brooks Free Library resumed their first Sunday series yesterday with a musical performance, and there aren't always a lot of free activities going on Sundays in the off-season, so these programs, this first Sunday series is very popular. The next first Sunday program will be November 6th at 2, and it's Stephen Collins' Irish Voices. It's dramatic readings from Yeats, Joyce, Haney, McCourt, and other well-known Irish authors. I also wanted to mention we have, by popular opinion of the town hall department heads, we will be resuming the Halloween parade on Monday, October 31st. And so I'll have a story time at the library, and then the children parade over here for trick-or-treating on both floors of town hall. And costumes are appreciated and usually worn by the staff. And the other thing, this month we're opening a new series called Read Around Harwich. We're taking our story time on the road. And so the first up is at the fire station with Captain Leanne Smith hosting the story time, and the kids will get to visit with the firefighters and have a tour of the building after that. And finally, one other thing I wanted to mention is that the libraries always welcome teens and tweens after school. Or a nice, safe drop-in place where kids can come and maybe read, but socialize, take part in activities, maybe do a little homework before their parents come pick them up. And that's the, dangerous hours after school when they'd be unsupervised. So the middle school has always had, since the middle school moved over to Chatham, they have had an express bus that brought the students straight from the middle school to the libraries and the community centers in both towns. They don't have the bus drivers for that this year, so they're not doing that. But I just want to let parents know, children can still come. They just take the regular bus, it's 307, and they can get off at the library and spend some time there till their parents get off of work. So thank you.
Thank you, Ginny. Anyone else for public comment announcement? Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just 2 items. First, we heard from Carol Ridley on behalf of the Pleasant Bay Alliance Group, that the Alliance through the town of Chatham, as the Alliance's fiscal agent, has received an MVP, or Municipal Vulnerability Program Action Grant, in the amount of $292,710, which is great news. The grant will be used to develop a client adaptation plan for Pleasant Bay, and of course, Town of Harwich is a proud member of that active group. Secondly, tomorrow evening on October 4th at 7 p.m., The Harwich Affordable Housing Trust will be conducting its first of many community forums, community engagement forums on the topic of housing. So everyone is invited to participate tomorrow, October 4th, 7 p.m. It's being held at the former middle school, 204 Sisson Road, and it'll be in the second floor library. Again, this is a great opportunity to start the discussion on what we need to do for Harwich for affordable housing.
Thank you, Joe. Anyone else for public comment announcement? Can I get a motion on the consent agenda?
Yes. I move, we vote to accept the resignation of James Atkinson from the Real Estate and Open Space Committee. And B, approve the Board of Selectmen's meeting minutes for September 6th, 2022, and September 19th of 2022.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion?
No.
Just offer our thanks
Thank
to
you, Jim.
Jim Atkins
Yeah.
for all of his service to the town on the Real Estate and Open Space Committee.
And he did note that he'd be interested in other things, so maybe
Yeah.
he'll join another board.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 3-0. Old business, town administrator to present the fiscal year 2024 financial assessment. Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening to you, members of the board and the public here assembled. In a moment, Jamie's going to have my PowerPoint presentation up here on the screen. But while we're having that come up, I just want to refer back to the packet. As you know, I provided a current financial assessment and memorandum form on Wednesday, September 14th, which the Assistant Town Administrator presented on my behalf for you folks to have. And the additional discussion tonight is to assist you in your next item under new business, which is to begin the process of developing your budget message for fiscal year 2024. So here we go. It's nothing, Jamie. Hopefully I'll do this right. So in addition to the memorandum, I wanted to just talk about some of the key items that we deal with when we build a budget in municipalities, and certainly here in Harwich. And this is the phrase sources and uses is what you will call is one of the many pages that we saw in this massive spreadsheet from the finance director. And sources and uses is the general categories that we use when we talk about revenue and expenditures. So the revenue are the sources, the expenditures are the uses, and I just wanted to cover some quick items on that for you to have in your background as you discuss the budget message. So for the town of Harwich, we rely, as most towns do, generally first on our tax levy. So that's our real estate and personal property taxes. We, as most towns do on Cape Cod, see very little state aid, and in fact, the state aid that we get more often than not is negated by what we pay out to the state on assessments. Local receipts is what we develop. Part of my memorandum on September 14th talked about the estimated receipts for fiscal year 2023. We just concluded the first quarter of that, and mid-quarter we were looking at 19% return on that, meaning we're on track, but local receipts are something we'll dive into as we get into the budget discussion to evaluate what our estimated receipts were as we build estimated receipts for the next year and compare those to actuals. And then there's all others, and as you'll see later on the slide, all other revenue sources is a bigger draw than state aid, but still the third on the category there. So when we talk about uses and sources, this is the most complete report to date. I know it's blocked for those of us here at home, here at home, it feels like home, here in the board meeting. So I just walk you through what the slide's showing here is the revenue sources that I just talked about, tax levy, state aid, local receipts, and all others. You can see how that's trended since 2018, and you can see that for 2023, it has yet to be developed. So we've got the tax levy year over year, state aid, local receipts, all others. Fiscal year 2018 was a figure of 62.3 million, I believe that is, and 2022 we were looking at revenue sources of 77.2 million. Again, that's not all that we use for the budget, but that is revenue that was derived from those sources in that time frame. So as we get into the budget planning for fiscal year 24, we'll start to be able to fill in the columns there for fiscal year 2023, but that's an evolving process over the year. Just a quick graph, I will note that, yes, you'll see that my presentation is predominantly black and white. I use that as a metaphor for this is a straightforward presentation and not because of the fact that I'm colorblind. So for those that like colors, I threw that slide in. That's just a graphical interpretation of what you saw on the previous page. So those are the revenues or the sources that we derive. So now the uses, typically you'll see that we have 6 groupings that go back to the expenditures for government. So that's general government, which would be everything but the categories that you see following. So we have general government, public safety, education, public works, human services, culture and recreation. That's also the way that we report those figures back to the Department of Revenue, where the validated figures you saw on the past screen relate to that. So this is what the Department of Revenue for the Commonwealth is aware of. Beyond those uses, we also have debt service, unclassified expenditures, transfers and others, and that's some of those assessments that I talked about to the state, the county, and others. So when we look at the uses, same thing for that multi-year look. You can see how our expenditures for those groupings has been year over year since 2018. And you'll see that for 2022, while we had the revenue figures, the expenditure figures are part of the Schedule A process that Anne Marie Ellis, our finance director, works on, and she has recently sent those figures to the Commonwealth DOR to be certified. So once they certify that those expenditures are correct and accurate, we'll update that sheet. And then, of course, we're building in 2023 what we want to have for expenditures for 24. So 23 is not there because we're just in the first quarter of the fiscal year, yet here we are still talking about the budget for next year. Mary's not here to prompt me, so of course I would have said town meeting is in a mere 213 days away. Again, there's the graphical interpretation for that. And so then really, to help the board, to help you frame out what you're gonna do next, and that is to start constructing the budget message, we talk about filling in the blanks. So as you can see on the sheets earlier, we don't know what the tax levy numbers are. Of course, we can have a rough estimate of where we were last year. We know that 2.5 is the levy limit, but we also know there's new growth. However, as you build your budget message, we know that you'll be setting the tax rate next month, and that will give us the exact number of how much levy limit is available. And I know from direct experience, and you probably know from years past as well, that the town generally relies upon up to 99, I think last year we were 99.8% of using the levy limit. So we use as much up to the levy limit as we can. We never hit 100%, but we're very close to it. In addition to setting the tax rate next month, as we go through the process of discussing the budgets with the departments, we also go through the process of evaluating their assumptions on revenue for the next year. And again, we do that by analyzing what we estimated last year, how we're doing fiscal year, and again, well, we should have later this month the full first quarter to see how first quarter of fiscal year 23 came in for actual versus the estimate. And so we build that over time. So those numbers will help fill in the spreadsheet and help fill in the overall message. And a part of that as well is the free cash certification. Ms. Ellis, as our finance director, has submitted for free cash certification. So we expect to hear from that hopefully in the fall this year as we're doing the budget. And that's another funding source that will come into play in our discussion. So then after we start filling in the blanks and we have that data, I would say that my request of the board is as you build your budget message, within that, you build in the priorities. And so for us to come to a determination of what we want to prioritize in fiscal year 2024, we have to be aware of what's coming up, and those are the bullet points that I'll go to in a moment, as well as factor in the current conditions, and those are the decisions that we've already made or the marketplace conditions that exist. So as we talk about developing priorities in your next agenda item, we know that we have major infrastructure projects coming up. I'm not just saying this because Dan and the crew are here, but our wastewater superintendent will be coming before the capital outlay plan. In fiscal year 2024, there are several water and wastewater, so I should have put water up there as well, infrastructure projects. Now, we've been aware of them, but now they're coming home to roost and we have to factor that in. Those infrastructure projects, in addition to our capital investment in physical plant, generally speaking, our buildings and grounds, those are the two largest impacts upon our capital plan that's being worked on presently by the Capital Outlay Committee. Has an impact on our other capital needs. So as you know, the Capital Outlay Committee will be coming before you and the Finance Committee to meet jointly as is required by the charter, and that is scheduled to take place at your meeting on Monday, December 5th of this year. What the Capital Outlay Committee and I are working on right now is, with those major infrastructure projects of water and wastewater that are coming up in fiscal year 24, and some of the discussion items that we're looking at for investment in our buildings and grounds, that with the other capital needs represents a capital outlay plan budget in fiscal year 24 right now of more than $73 million. Now, that's an eye-popping number because that number in the capital plan is pretty close to our overall comprehensive budget of the town for fiscal year 23. But when you back out the water, wastewater projects, and I would say in this instance, we want to back them out to get a sense of what other projects are lying in there. If you back out water and wastewater and you back out the investment in physical plant, the rest of the capital plan right now for fiscal year 24 is less than 2.5 million. And that's significant because in most years, we average 4 to 5 million in capital items separate from the major infrastructure projects that are out there. So more information will be coming to bear as the capital outlay does their work. And then last but not least, as I mentioned, we want to factor in the current conditions. As you know, the town has been successful in negotiating with several of the collective bargaining agreements. We officially have 4 in and 4 to go, but the remaining 4 are in the final stages, and I expect that we'll have all collective bargaining associations under 3-year agreements this fall, and so we're going to know exactly what that means for fiscal years 24, 25, and 26. And then to no one's surprise, we need to factor in the current external marketplace issues that are impacting upon our operating budgets and everyone's way of life. And of course, that is the inflation issue, supply chain issues, and costs in energy and other utilities. And so, you know, we talk about budgets that are usually 2.5%, and for those items with inflation and certainly energy costs, we're seeing increases of anywhere from 8 to 10%, which is extraordinary. So we need to be aware of those market conditions as you start to develop your budget message and your priorities. So that must mean I'm done.
Questions? Julie?
Thank you, Joe. Very comprehensive. And the only thing I just happened to be thinking about over the last, few months anyways, and I know we have been for a while, but that I don't see in our proposed is technology. I know we're doing Microsoft Word and all that. Yep. But I don't see the GIS operating at, for the assessor's office and some other, I know we're working towards the permitting online for the building department. Yep. So I'm just thinking, just so that we plug in a number there and hold some monies there for, an estimate on bringing those things up to speed. Sure,
and if I could give a response, it's a great segue. Sarah Eaton, our Director of Information Technology, has been on the job 2 days shy of a month, but she and I have met last week and this week, and she'll be able to give me capital items for fiscal years 24 and beyond that capture a lot of what you're talking about, as well as we're analyzing some opportunities to purchase in the present fiscal year. So within the present fiscal year, we think we can make an impact on GIS. We think we can make an impact on the permitting and expanding upon that and through the capital going forward. But also on community engagement platforms. We've got the local planning committee, we've got the Affordable Housing Trust, so we want to be able to have a platform and that's through technology, and we hope to do that this year as well as some other resources that will help us with more robust sharing of budget documents. So that's already in play, and I expect that she'll be submitting her formal applications to me next week, so that when the capital outlay meets on October 21st, they won't be meeting with me and Sarah on technology, but that will be embedded in the plan. And for me, that's really the last item to be added to the capital plan. So we are aware of it, we are tracking it, and we'll know that sooner rather than later in the process.
Great, thank you.
Anything else?
No, nothing.
Larry?
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Joe. We've done this in the past, but could you build the debt obligations for the various capital budget items for us, so we can look at that as we consider our budget formation?
Absolutely, and if I may, you've also spurred the other point that I wanted to bring up that's not in the presentation. But as we talk about debt obligations, I know that we want to examine our borrowing capacity to see where we are at the limit. We don't want to be certainly over that, but we want to see where we are up to that. Additionally, I've talked to the capital outlay. One of the things that Anne Marie Ellis and I and others are going to be exploring is this the time to explore capital expenditure exclusions? So given that there's more investment in some of those other projects, is that something that we want to pursue? So I don't know the answer. I wouldn't have a recommendation yet, but I think it is a worthy topic to explore as we do that. So we'll have more information certainly on our debt obligations as to where we are, what's coming off the books. We know land bank is coming up sooner rather than later. So we'll have more information on that as we go
Because that
forward.
can help drive our budget discussions as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Larry. Joe, on the income, local receipts, coming off of an 11% and 9% increase, why are we dropping that estimate down 17%?
So you're going back to the memo?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just a minute. Well, I think what we're showing in the spreadsheets that were there is, again, for me, it's one of the disconnects that we have with the charter, whereby I have an obligation to give you an assessment, you have an obligation, so I'm meeting that, you're meeting your obligation to develop a budget message, but we don't have the benefit of a lot of information. And the answer, for that would be, we don't even know how we've done yet in Q1 to start building those assessments. So what you're seeing there is if we carried over the revenue assessments that we had all come to terms with, if you will, in fiscal year '23, if we didn't account for any increase whatsoever, that's where you see that reduction. I don't believe that's necessarily gonna remain, but that's in the first glance of revenue that we're looking at. And I also want to put out there, we've talked many times about free cash, and I think we as a town have to have a deeper dive into our revenue estimates to be more in line with the actuals. And I think we have good data built up since pandemic, because the delta between estimated and actual revenues is what's powering those big numbers on free cash. So we do want to wrestle that to a better number so we don't have an exorbitant free cash amount. Not that free cash is a problem, it's a perception of a problem. So the numbers that you're seeing are just preliminary numbers to get the discussion started. If we did not change anything and went year over year with no increase, we'd be looking at that deficit that you noticed.
And I know we have a free cash policy that we're trying to stick to too, but we have had residents complain about the exorbitant amount of free cash that we've had for the last 6 or 7 years. And we continue to have the conversation about trying to get it under control, but then year after year, it's in the millions, and we're figuring out where to spend it. And I think on your last slide, where it said next steps, the next steps slide, and talking about inflation and everything that our taxpayers are being hit with, and going to the grocery store and having their grocery bill doubled, I think it's incumbent upon this board to really look at spending this year, and put some things in place that we're not just spending, and planning a little bit more for the future and reducing the budget.
Well, if I could, Mr. Chairman, that's why I was hoping to take a slightly different approach with rather than just a dynamic budget message as you've done before, is that perhaps we start a conversation tonight that goes forward on, given that we have, these are tight times for everybody, and, you know, we have to be very mindful. I've always said that a municipal budget is meant to be a statement of town's priorities, and I think that is the key word for this year. So if there was a phrase or a mindset that I'm applying, it is prioritize. And I think we have to be mindful of what do we want the budget to look like when it goes to town meeting and hopefully passes? What does that prioritize for the residents, taxpayers, visitors, and all involved in our town? And to me, that should shape our decision-making in the coming months that we're going to devote to this.
Thank you. Follow-up questions, Larry?
Well, I think more of a comment. I do look forward to a detailed discussion on free cash, because that is an issue each year. I know there's FinCom as well, because we like that gap because we can use it to fund projects the following year. But it skews our discussion in the current year. It makes us kind of forget what we're doing. So the policy and just a general discussion of Michael and Joe and Julie is, I'm looking forward to more detail this year than maybe we've ever done before.
Yep, absolutely.
Any follow-up, Julie?
No, I mean, I think when we're gonna talk about sewer and water, and so I think, you know, we know that's a priority. I think we try to keep a top 5 priorities and really focus on those and try to cut what we can, where we can, in terms of trying to help taxpayers. It is difficult out there, so. We also need to prepare for our own utility bills internally, so.
Any further?
That's it, just that I would argue that you've met your obligation to the charter because we're beginning the budget message development. And, you know, the next 6 weeks, I think, are going to be critical for us to understand what's going to be available.
Anyone in the public wish to comment on this? Dana, you're hovering.
I'll just say that the Finance Committee did start these same kind of discussions ourselves too, and they'll be ongoing. We actually talked about coming up with a financial policy on just the topic of coming up with free cash and how we do it. We had a workshop kind of session on that. But,
The current free cash policy really puts us where we end up every year.
right,
You know, and that was challenged last year by several residents, and I would agree with them that the number needs to go down. It seems to be a lot, and then it tends to be a bit of a shopping spree that we try and rein in last minute, so.
yeah, when we first started talking about it on the Finance Committee, there were so many new people coming into key positions that we knew that that's gonna be part of the discussion, so we just started it.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Joe.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to state that the presentation that I gave tonight will be added to the materials on the website tomorrow so that people will have access to that as well.
Thank you. New business A really falls in with old business A. So Board of Selectmen to issue their fiscal year 2024 budget message. Tonight's the beginning of the conversation on that. I did expect that we would have at least one more board member here tonight, but we're missing 2 key board members. I have asked them to send me their priorities and their thoughts on the budget message, so next week we can have some sort of draft. I would add that to both Larry and Julie. The sooner the better, with what your priorities are, and anything that you'd like to see in a budget message. I did put in 2 budget messages as examples for, one from Joe and one from you, Larry. And then tonight before you is the one that I did in 2019. But if you could pick these apart and send in what your priorities are, I will, for the next meeting, have a draft budget message.
Okay.
But to Joe's point, I think this is the beginning of a lot of conversations on the budget message. And this year, I think it's gonna be extremely important. Joe, with that, mention the collective bargaining, and we did go to town meeting and get appropriation for $750,000 for this year's budget. Can you send me what the percentage of the budget increase will be just based on contractual obligations as it relates to staff and contracts?
So we can, I think it would be appropriate that we do that once the other 4 have come to a conclusion. Anything I send right now would still be a protected item because we're in negotiations.
All right, thank you. Anything, Larry, on this?
No, fine.
Julie?
No.
Anyone in the public? Okay, determination on payout option of Johnson & Johnson opioid settlement. Joe?
So, Mr. Chairman, there's nothing on the agenda on this one because it's really just a decision for the board to make as to whether you want to annuitize the first 5 years or take it as a lump sum. At your meeting next week, you will have an opportunity to discuss about the use of the funds, but the chairman was presented with an email from, as many folks were, from the law firm saying, do you want to change your lump sum, which is what will happen if we don't have a decision by next Tuesday, or do you want to spread the first payment out of the first 5 years? And so the chairman asked me my thoughts on it, and generally speaking, to me, annuitizing, it breaks it out. It's all the same numbers in the end, but I think it helps us break it out for program purposes. So I would recommend that we opt to not go with the lump sum and annuitize the first 5 years, but it is a decision that has to be made by the executive branch.
We don't need to wait until next week to do that.
Right, you have to make a decision. If you wanted to take lump sum, we don't do anything, and it's locked in next week. If you wanted to annuitize, you would need to tell me that, and we would inform the law firm, and we're all set.
Larry?
Well, personally, I sometimes like lump sums better than annuities, but I'm gonna go with Joe's recommendation on this. If it makes the operations easier and budget formation, I would go with
Yeah,
that.
and if I may, the rest of the payment, which extends another 15 years, is individual years payments with no lump sum.
Julie?
I agree, I normally like the lump sum, but I think the annuity makes sense, annuitizing it, not the annuity, but you know what I mean. Because I think you're right, it forces us to look at it each year and earmark it, so I think that's probably the better approach.
I agree.
All right, so noted, thank you.
You need a motion?
It would help, but I understand the will of the board.
Okay, well, just to formalize then, I move that we accept the payout option of Johnson & Johnson as a annuitized fund for the opioid settlement.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Anyone in the public? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 3-0.
Thank you.
Item C, new business, land of low value auction. We see we have Amy here tonight. Hi, Amy. And basically, this is just for an update and for more advertising on what we're about to do.
Yep. Good evening, Amy Bullock, Treasurer Collector. So the auction is set for October 26th. That's a Wednesday. Normally, when they do auctions for land, they do it at the property location, but because these are all landlocked parcels, they're going to do it here in the parking lot at Town Hall. They have a mobile auction unit that they're going to set up. If it rains, they have a canopy they'll put up. And they did suggest to us that we try and add in a couple of parcels if we could, just as a draw. So initially, I had presented 3, but when the attorney researched them, she found that one of them, the title was kind of messy and it was going to take too long. So now we're down to the 2. They are 13 Queen Anne Road and 1055 Oak Street. 13 Queen Anne we foreclosed on April 2nd of 2019, and 1055 Oak Street, January 28th of 2013. So providing I can get a fair market value for those prior to the 26th, I think it's a good idea that we add those in.
And then, if people want information on these, Amy, are they to come to your
I've had
office?
several people ask, and I've emailed all the information on the parcels to several people. After I did this memo to you, which initially it included a sample advertisement, I think for the town of Hanson, I got the information packet from Sullivan & Sullivan for our auction, so everything is in the packet tonight.
Great.
All the locations, the property record cards, everything.
There's Bank Street, that was another one we discussed, and I know that there's been people interested in several. There's 3 on Bank Street that were part of your original list.
Begs for the land of low value auctions.
I thought so, yes.
Let me get the list
No.
here.
It's
I know we've got one gentleman that's emailed several times and been to several of the real estate open space meetings related to the Bank Street.
Yeah, I mean, they are still all landlocked. All those land to low value parcels are landlocked, so, I mean, I think for the most part, they're only gonna be wanted by anybody that's in a butter.
And they're marsh, right?
Yeah, a lot of it, yeah.
Questions from the board, Larry?
None. Thank you, Amy.
Julie?
No, except the two, I had read that you mentioned about including those last two.
Right.
And in terms of getting a determination on what the lowest will accept, and you said how far out are you getting that, like another week or
Well,
so?
I asked Carly to email Richard Waystack to see if he would be able to provide us with that. It's fair market value is what we can auction them for,
Yeah,
so,
okay,
yeah.
thanks.
But I think those two parcels will be a good draw.
Mhm.
Great. Joe, anything? Amy, thank you for the update.
You're welcome.
Just for the public, in tonight's packet is what we're talking about, both people online and that will watch this tomorrow. All right, update from town council on 4th Street property donation. Joe, I think that falls on you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as you know, staff and council have been working on a potential land donation, which would eventually come before town meeting as early as May of next year. So Katie Klein has informed us that the tax title attorney has an update. There's some more things to dig into, but we're still working on it.
Okay.
Again, the effort is to try and get it all cleared up so that if the donation does go forward, we'll be able to finalize that through town meeting in May.
Okay, so the target is to have it on the annual town meeting this year.
Correct, and so the requisite article and everything else ahead of time would be done.
I did read that the assessing department is gonna start doing some research on it tomorrow.
Yes, and thank you.
Any questions from the board? Larry?
None.
Julie?
No.
Anyone in the public? All set? All right, vote to support the Garden Club's 90th year anniversary planting native tree initiative. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Diane DeGennaro, representing the Conservation Committee of the Garden Club of Harwich. And we want to thank you for allowing us to come before you again. You've been a wonderful partnership in the past for us, and we hope to make that happen again. And I just want to quickly take you back 90 years to Mary Snow and her friends deciding that there was too much construction happening on the Cape, and they were worried about that. So they got together and formed the Garden Club of Harwich. And one of their early initiatives was planting trees along Sisson Road. Well, fast forward 90 years, we again find ourselves with many people concerned about the degradation of the environment. But now we've got climate change overlapping all of that, creating a sense of urgency that wasn't there when Mary and her friends started the club. So to celebrate our 90th anniversary, we decided to pick up the mantle left by Mary and her friends and turn our attention to planting of more trees. Trees are the powerhouse of the environment, and it's a very low-tech, easy infrastructure to include in your town. And as I mentioned in the packet, the positive impact of trees is immense for very little money. It would mitigate a lot of what's happening with climate change. It would give us shade, reduce the temperature, help with erosion and flood control. It sucks in air pollution. They suck in water pollution. They'll suck in nitrogen, heavy metals from the soil. And studies have shown that they help with people's anxiety. So there are a lot of reasons why trees are the way to go with climate change. And they provide wildlife habitat, which we have worked on with our last initiative throughout the Harwiches. So with that in mind, we decided we would ask Harwich residents to help us by planting trees, particularly native trees, because they are better at withstanding the stresses that we would find out on Cape Cod. We're hoping for 90-plus trees, hopefully native trees, to be planted by June 2023. And we're publicizing this throughout the town. We've got our form that residents can fill out and drop off at the Chamber of Commerce, at the community center, at the library, or you can also do it online. We come before you tonight because we would like you to give us the go-ahead to partner with the town, because we've already had several people say they couldn't put any more trees on their property, but they would like to donate to a public space in Harwich. And Amy Uzowski has already jumped on board and said she's happy to, anything having to do with trees, she's happy to help us out. But we were hoping that we could get a okay from you to move forward in that way.
Excellent, thank you. Larry?
That would be excellent. I'm sure we'll endorse that. It's interesting, I was contacted by a resident last week, I think, concerned we have some development going on off of 39 Bascom, it's called, another off of 137. What's that? Forget the name of it. It's by just up from Hall's Path.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Concerned that, in fact, it seems like when they do that, the first thing they do is completely level and move all the trees. So the concern was, or the idea was, why couldn't they protect some of those trees while they're building rather than flatten it? So I don't know where we'll go with that, because we don't have the authority to do it, but it'd be nice if we could encourage builders to protect some of the natural trees that are already there.
We'd be happy to work with the town in any way that made sense to make that happen. And we partner with the National Wildlife Federation, and I'm finding on their calls nationally, there are towns that are looking at bylaw changes to affect what kind of plantings they would put in, whether they're natives, and things like, leaving certain trees. I think it's a worthy cause to look to the future, and we're happy to partner with the town to do something like that.
Thank you.
Julie?
So I will admit, when I was reading my packet, I first read it and I thought, I can't plant 90 trees.
I thought that was going to be a problem for some people, thinking 90 on one property. But
Actually, it'd be a kid's problem, not yours.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I could do it now.
But I love the idea, and I was even willing to plant 90 had I had a lot of acreage. But I think it's terrific, and I agree with you, Larry. You see developments go in and the trees come down, and, that certainly can be looking at that more creatively. So thank you for this initiative, and I think we all probably agree that we would love to work with you to do anything to embellish the town's property with trees.
we will work with Amy then and see what we can get accomplished. Thank
Where
you.
else could people find this form other than our 398-page packet? They don't want to sift through that.
They will find it at the Chamber of Commerce, at the library, at the community center, online, and on this form it gives our website. Anywhere else, ladies? Besides that, did I miss somebody? And Town Hall, here outside of Amy's office.
Outside of the Conservation Department at Town Hall.
Mhm.
Don't keep them at your home?
But you can send me the form with my address on it.
I just want to make sure there's if somebody wants to donate
Mhm.
a tree rather than plant one, who do they contact?
If they want to donate a tree, that would assume it would be on public land, so they would contact Amy.
Okay, conservation.
And she seems like she's ready and willing to take on that project.
Before we go to a motion that Julie's going to make to support,
90 trees.
I would say that I was fortunate enough to have the tornado go through my yard, and I just finished my 27th tree last week. So I've planted 27, so if that counts, you're well on your way to the goal.
No?
One pin for your property map at the
Okay.
community center.
Okay, that's
One
perfect.
little green
Fill out the
pin.
form,
But you fill out the form and give it to one of us.
And most of the trees are listed in your preferred trees, so.
Excellent. And I should say that on this form, it does list preferred trees that are native. And really, if we really want to stress planting native, because in the long run, they last longer, they hold up better, and they'll just, more bang for your buck. And the local nurseries are now pretty much getting up to speed on providing native plantings, so.
Well, it's a great time, too. The rain finally started, and the water commissioners might lift the ban eventually, so.
Thank goodness, yeah.
Julie?
So I move that we vote to support the Garden Club's 90th year anniversary Plant a Native Tree initiative.
Second.
Moved and second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 3-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right, vote to set in-person early voting hours for the November 8th, 2022 state election.
Good evening, everyone. Emily Mitchell, Town Clerk. We are quickly gearing up for the November 8th state general election, and an important part of that will be setting the in-person early voting hours. So for all state general elections and presidential elections, we have 2 full weeks of in-person early voting. That happens here at the town hall. It's based out of the town clerk's office. And the state sets some general parameters for the hours towns are required to hold. And I did outline those in a memo that should be in your packet. But essentially, during the first week, which will start Saturday, October 22nd, we will have 6 weekend hours. We're planning to put those all on Saturday, the 22nd, from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then for that first week that will run Monday through Friday, the state allows towns of our size to reduce hours to 50% of our regular business hours. And based on what we saw with the primary, I am recommending that we reduce to 50% of those hours. It's really a valuable opportunity for voters to participate, but we saw generally low turnout, sometimes as few as 9 voters total over the course of a 7.5-hour period. The highest we saw was 30, and afternoons were busiest for us. So I did include a proposal in your packet to reduce those that first week hours to just over 50%. It would be 4 hours per day, that Monday through Friday, alternating between afternoon hours and morning hours. So I had Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of that week to be from 12 noon to 4 p.m., and Tuesday and Thursday would be from 8:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m., again, to try and maximize our availability for folks with their schedules. And then for the second week of voting, so that would start with October 29th, the Saturday, we'd have 6 more hours, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., and the following week, that Monday through Friday, would be our full business hours, and we are required to have full business hours that second week. So 8:30 to 4 p.m. each day, October 31st through November 4th. So really, the only part that the board would be voting, would kind of have the latitude to adjust, is that first week to reduce to that approximately 50% normal business hours, and that is what I'm recommending to you tonight.
Thank you. Questions, Julie?
I guess the only question I have is that any different than what the former town clerk did in the past?
Truthfully, I don't know how they set these hours. These requirements are part of the Votes Act that passed in June of 2022.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what the legal requirements were before that act passed this
Okay,
summer.
thank you. That makes sense. So no, I don't have any problem with that. I mean, 12 to 4 is sufficient time, I would think, and then you're gonna go full-time for the next week, so.
Larry?
No, I'm fine with your recommendation.
Thank you. There's, it's the second to last line in her memo, there's a recommended vote. Can I get a motion on that? Pick it up from there, Julie.
Sure. I move that we accept the recommendation as outlined for the person voting by the town clerk.
Second.
Moved and seconded to accept the in-person early voting schedule as
as
outlined.
outlined.
Right.
Any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 3-0.
Thank you.
I would take a motion on G.
Vote to approve the special permit for one-day entertainment, Cranberry Liquors, 555 Main Street, Saturday, October 8th, 2022, 12 p.m. to 2 p.m., with recorded live music with amplification outside.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded to approve the application. Any discussion?
None.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 3-0, Joe. Take a motion on H.
Vote to approve the committee appointment recommended by the interview committee, Glenn Memick, I'm sure I tortured that, Harwich Energy and Climate Action Committee, full member, term to expire June 30th, 2025.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 3-0. Motion on I.
Vote to reappoint the following designee to the Community Preservation Committee, Robert Doan, Historic District Historical Commission, term to expire June 30th, 2023.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, 3-0. Wastewater. Dan and company. All right, Dan, looks like we have 7 topics. We can start just on A, I guess, and we can bounce around if you want, but the purpose of this next hour-ish is to talk about wastewater.
All right, I'll do my best to try to get out as soon as possible. And if it's okay with the board, I do have a slideshow to accompany the discussion. It is a little out of order based on the agenda, just trying to keep the flow moving, so if that's all right.
That's fine.
All right.
If you introduce your guest,
Yeah.
that would be great.
So I'm Dan Pelletier, Water Wastewater Superintendent for the town of Harwich. With me tonight is Nancy Human of GHD and Jeff Gregg, also of GHD. And Mark Drainville is also here in the back. So if I can just grab my
And
notes.
Alan Thompson.
And Alan Thompson, Water Wastewater Commissioner. All right, so we are good to go. So I just want to start off with a quick update on the CWMP revisions. Obviously, you may recall, we were hoping to have the CWMP revisions wrapped up this summer. Since we've started that project, we've had a few things come in to impact milestones and progress. One of which being we are still awaiting the arrival of a new town planner, which going with that is the local comprehensive plan, which I know we had a desire to kind of loop all of these items together so that we were doing it all at the same time. Also, as the board's aware, we had the new regulatory requirements proposition from DEP come out, so there's been a handful of things that have kind of stifled the progress there. So not ready for tonight, but once we get a better handle on town planner coming on board and the regulations, we'll probably be coming back with a contract extension to continue that work once the information becomes available.
I'm going to pause you for a second and call on Joe. Joe, given that the fact that we have not been able to fill the planner position and not from lack of trying, we discussed in our Tuesday meeting the potential of outsourcing and going to some contract help. Would you elaborate on that a little bit? Because what we don't want to
Sure.
do is slow this process down at all. And if there's some tools that we can give Dan, I would just soon try and get them to him sooner rather than later.
Sure, certainly. And just as you said, we continue to advertise for the position of Director of Planning and Community Development, but recognizing the struggle that we and other towns have had to attract that quality of candidate to the Cape. What Megan Eldridge, Assistant Town Administrator, and I are evaluating is she's reached out to the Collins Center at UMass Boston. What they do is they try to partner with towns to help with interim positions and also recommendations on firms they may be aware of that can provide that. So until we get our planner in, we do want to have, as we've done with engineering, some professional ability on board. So we're trying to get that wrapped up while we also do the search.
Thank you.
And just
Questions
if I
on
can,
that? Larry, you all set with that?
Set.
Okay, Julie?
No, I'm okay.
Go ahead, Dan.
And just on that, so, you know, we're gonna talk about some of this a little bit later in the presentation, but one of the main components that the planner is gonna be helpful for is really determining what, if any, zoning or changes may be required to accomplish, you know, different housing development goals or things that the town, you know, wants to steer the ship in that direction. What we're doing as part of the evaluation for Phase 3 and just kind of in this interim period is just been evaluating growth based on current zoning, current vacant lots, to just get a handle on what could be built within the existing confines of our bylaws. So for things that may warrant change, those are kind of what we're holding off on at this
Thank you,
point.
Dan.
So, Michael, I may,
Go ahead,
so,
Larry.
in terms of the language used in your slides, the quote intended use plan, is that your description of the comprehensive plan then, that
Yeah.
you're going through?
So the
Or is it something
intended,
else?
yeah, the intended use plan is the document that DEP publishes typically February, March, that identifies the projects slated to be funded with the State Revolving Loan Fund. So that's basically, we had, and we'll get into the schedule a little bit further, but when we submit the project evaluation form to DEP is the first step for SRF funding
So that's DEP's response to our
application.
application?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dan.
All right, and then just lastly, kind of on the CWMP component, just to tie it back into Route 28, we are progressing with that design. As everyone's well aware, it is a dry pipe. We are presently assuming that that's going to be going towards, to a plant in Dennis, but we are currently also trying to identify contingencies just in case for some reason that doesn't happen. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy to pick up.
Real quick on that, Dan, Selectman Howell asked a question or made a statement a couple weeks ago when we talked about this related to the pitch of that pipe. If it's going to Dennis, it's gonna be pitched one way. If it's going someplace else, it's gonna be
Right.
pitched the other way. How are we gonna make that decision if we have to do this in the short term and we haven't made a deal with Dennis yet, like we all hope?
You want to? All right, yeah, so when we initially set out on the project, we were anticipating to pitch the pipe from the town line in Dennis towards the Heron River Bridge. And Nancy's going to talk a little bit about some of the design challenges that we've come up against with that. But right now, as we've been currently evaluating it, we've been looking at a gravity system pitching towards 52 and 62 Route 28, if you will, where that being the low point, so.
Thank
But it is presenting challenges,
you. Yeah,
not having that decision made yet. So I'm going to talk about the Route 28 sewer project, and the main reason that's here in discussion tonight is that we're running up against some timelines, so we want to get that into the town meeting this spring. We have to complete our design, and we looked at a couple different options for the sewer that we wanted to discuss with you, and we're looking for concurrence if we can get it tonight, so we can move forward on our design. So here's the red is the project. It starts at Division Street and goes to the Herring River Bridge. It's actually water and sewer, so we might be throwing in water also as we talk about it, but tonight we're just talking about the sewer. Mass DOT is reconstructing Route 28, this section, and that's why we're looking at putting in a dry sewer pipe, because when they come in and redo the road, they have a moratorium that they don't want you, they make it very difficult for you to do anything for 5 years, which puts us into 2030, 2031. And we don't want to be tied to not being able to serve that area. So we were moving ahead, looking at, we looked at gravity sewer, low pressure sewer, and we're addressing the challenges to design this pipeline ahead of the CWMP, completing that. Because part of the CWMP locates where your pump stations are and that kind of thing. And so what we did to address not knowing necessarily the direction of the treatment plant and where the pump stations are, the first thing we did is try to locate the pump station that section of pipe would flow to. And we moved it away from the river and the flood sections. We found a piece of property, and I think there's been conversation ongoing to secure that property. Then we began our design for the gravity sewer, And we're fighting topography, and so it ends up being fairly deep in places. And we're over 20 feet deep in places, and then to get to the pump station, it drove the pump station down to 35 feet deep approximately. At that point, we started looking at the groundwater and realized how shallow the groundwater is pretty much along the whole route. It's, 6.5 to 8 feet deep, and we're looking at 20 feet, 35 feet deep. Not only is that drives the construction cost really high, but also with that high groundwater, you're going to be struggling with maintenance, the infiltration inflow over time. And that flow also increases your sewer treatment costs because you're sending that water down to the treatment plant. We have a profile of what it looked like there within the colored areas, the groundwater. And that is our initial design of the gravity sewer, what it would look like.
The addresses you spoke of that we've worked on securing, is that the 52 and 62?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be the church parcel that's before town meeting and the one across the street from that?
Correct.
Thank you.
So at that point, once we realized the costs that we were looking at, we thought we should step back and look at another option that didn't seem like it was a done deal that we should go gravity, because it just was expensive and it looked like long-term problems. So we looked at low-pressure sewer. And it's anticipated that we'll run into this again as we start to serve West Harwich. We think that West Harwich will have a continual problem with groundwater. We will, of course, look at that ahead of time, but there's indications that there's a lot more of that in that area, not just 28. And the advantage of low-pressure sewer is that we don't need to have flow downhill, so because it's under pressure, we can just put it at the same depth we'd put a water pipe, which is about 5 feet, and we might run into a little water, but not much. We might still need the pump station. We're still planning on that we might need that, but we can raise it up a lot because the depth of it was set by the gravity sewer, and so that would change the price of the construction of the pump station. And we compared the costs of the two projects, and low pressure sewer was about half the price. And we have an example here that we did of the cost estimate of a gravity and the low pressure for a section of pipe on Route 28. And in this low pressure, I actually included the grinder pump stations and the service connections only because that's really your total cost to put it in. Is not determined yet who pays for that cost, and if the homeowner pays for it, this price would be, even significantly less. But big picture, that would be the cost to go low pressure, and it's almost half the price of gravity sewer.
Pitch wouldn't be as important at that point.
There's no pitch, it's like
No
water
pitch.
at that point, yeah.
And the groundwater, sorry, go ahead,
I
Larry.
was gonna say, I appreciate putting the grinder pumps in this construction part. For each homeowner, you've added those. Is there operational cost built in as well then?
Yeah, and I guess that's,
Cost on the.
yeah, it's part of a kind of a bigger discussion. Hopefully we can tackle some of this tonight. And as Nancy noted, the grinder pumps were included in the low pressure cost, and that was by request. And jumping back to phase 2, when we talked about dropping the pipe on 137 to accommodate gravity, we paid a premium for that. And looking at this and acknowledging that we're going to be really up against the groundwater issue, and it's going to be a significantly cheaper installation to go with low pressure. That was one of the discussions I wanted to have was,
No, it makes a lot of sense to me. I was just wondering where it
Yeah.
shows up. Because other towns have done a similar thing, added the town pays for the pumps themselves, but then they've pushed on the maintenance of that after that to the homeowner.
right.
That's much less expensive, but we don't need that discussion tonight, but it's just,
Yeah, and I think they found that the maintenance is a lot less than they thought.
yeah.
They're,
No, that
they're
makes
pretty
sense, 'cause-
reliable.
Because then there's also buy-in
Right.
from the homeowners to pay attention.
Right, and that's kind of one of the things I was, if there's consensus around that, really as Route 28 as a project, but if we kind of want to think about carrying that precedent outward, there we're not, at this point, identifying large swaths of Phase 3 that may need low pressure, but it's not it's not impossible that there isn't that low house that's down on a retreat lot that may need a grinder pump. There was, I want to say, about 15 or so that were identified within Phase 2 that would need it. Just for numbers, we have had one grinder pump go in the Phase 2 area, so we don't have a big retroactive lift if there is a decision to go in that direction. There's a lot of details to figure out, but if it's something that the board's thinking of leaning in or leaning toward for Route 28, I guess I would kind of extend that to, do we want to extend that same opportunity to Phase 3, and if Phase 3, do we want to go back and look at Phase 2 as well? To Larry's question about the maintenance, I've been trying to think about this, and Nancy and I have discussed it. You know, if we're looking at a couple thousand grinder pumps, that's going to be a pretty big lift for me to try to manage if we are on the hook for maintenance, or if someone doesn't have a home generator to go out and pump them out. It would be my preference, just from an operational standpoint, that we purchase the grinder and it be the homeowner's responsibility from there. However, I would be open to implementing the will of the board, if you will. So.
Well, this makes a ton of sense to me, because we're going down 5 feet if something breaks instead of 25 and 30 feet, which I thought was a problem when we did East Harwich. I mean,
Yeah.
what you put in the ground eventually is going to break.
Right.
Our water systems lasted a lot longer than we thought, but
It's getting there.
we're gonna have to maintain this.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, you know, another thing too that we had talked about is constructability and putting a water pipe in and then potentially a sewer pipe 20 feet next to it, you know, aligning up all the construction activities. One thing I just want to bring up before I get too much further, we did have a meeting with Mass DOT last week as a kickoff to their Route 28 paving project. And in those discussions, we had echoed some concern about supply chain issues with materials and things like that. It's not a done deal yet, but they kind of offered that we were initially trying to get this work done ahead of Mass DOT under a Town of Harwich contract, and then after we were done, they would come through and pave. We're now in early discussions with them about incorporating this into Mass DOT's project itself, and then it would be bid by Mass DOT with their construction oversight, and it could realize, you know, some more savings on both the water and sewer side of things. So more on that to come, but still very much in the works.
Thank you. Any questions thus far, Julie?
Did they give you any kind of a estimated start date on?
Yeah, they were looking at February 24, if I'm not mistaken.
To bid, and
to
probably
bid.
construction, probably after the summer.
After the summer, okay. Thank you.
And both the water and sewer, we've applied for SRF loans for both of them,
Great. Larry?
so we'll find out.
No, that's coming up soon.
It is.
It is, yeah. No,
Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. Dan, when you talk about the grinder pumps and you have that chart up there, is there a line item up there that's already bearing the cost of the grinder pumps?
Yes.
Where did you embed it?
Is that in the construction?
Yes, it's under construction.
So even with the grinder pumps, the construction costs are still that much lower?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask one
Go ahead.
question on grinder
Yep.
pumps? How did we get from possibly having 12 in Phase 2 to only needing 1?
There's still 12 possible, if you will, for
Oh.
Phase 2, but only one of them has been installed to
Installed,
date.
okay.
So my thought is, if we're going to adopt this policy, what does that mean for people who've already put in grinder pumps? Fortunately, we only have one, so it's
Yeah, okay,
hopefully easy to figure out.
thanks.
All right, well, I guess, so is that a decision the board is willing and able to make at this point?
Which decision?
Well, I guess one for moving forward with low pressure for Route 28.
yeah, I'm comfortable with it.
Julie?
I'm comfortable with it. I guess my only question on it is, so we're gonna put these pipes in the ground, obviously related to the paving, et cetera, but what's the time frame? And I know we have a phase, but I can't recall it. What is the time frame that we would be looking to do this, depending on where we end up with Dennis?
So in my head, this is kind of how I've thought about it. If we're gonna put a dry pipe in the ground, that should be the next place we get to once we have a place to treat it. So if it's with Dennis or we end up going in on our own, it would be my recommendation to utilize that pipe, so it's not sitting there in the ground.
Okay, and the low pressure, you mentioned that we may still need the pump station, but we don't know that yet. When will we know that?
I think some of that's gonna depend on where you're actually ending up treating it. So gives you more flexibility right now as you're trying to plan out the rest of what you're gonna do in West Harwich to secure a pumping station location, and then it gives you more flexibility to send it in a bunch of different locations, because you know that you have a location to send it to. The one advantage of having the low-pressure sewer is we have a little bit more flexibility on which way we route things, because now it's a pipe network of, it's not relying on slope.
Okay.
It's relying on pressure.
So we've left our options open.
So you don't foresee a situation that we go down the route of, trying to secure one of those properties and not need it?
No, well, I mean, and one of the things we've talked quite a bit about Route 28, the pump station site itself. One of the big contingencies, and please guys correct me if I'm overspeaking, but is knowing exactly what the head conditions the pumps are gonna pump against is really a big decider in the pump station itself. So I think once we get more clarity with Dennis, exactly how long that pipe run is, that will dictate the head conditions that we could then determine whether or not the individual home grinders could make it there, or if they need to be boosted and augmented to make it to treatment.
Okay, thank you.
That, all right.
Yep.
You want a motion or a consensus?
But let me just, if I may, timing though. It could be, 5, 6 longer before Dennis is ready to go. So you're not worried about, the dry pipes will last for some time, I assume.
Yeah. The dry pipe is typically
You're saying when it's
HDPE.
not available, you're there, but we're not trying to rush it with
No.
nowhere to go.
We wouldn't need today to go and secure that station per se, but having the board having the authority to take it is instrumental in confidence moving forward. So if we don't get authorization to take it, we have no confidence we can secure it in the future, should we need it. At least now we have town meeting authorization. If it's determined we need it, we can execute on the previously approved town meeting vote.
Larry, do you want to make a motion to go to the low pressure?
I move that we proceed with the low-pressure option on the Route 28 dry pipe, and we explore use elsewhere as appropriate.
Second.
Thank you.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Anyone in the audience? Anyone online? Town administrator? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 3-0.
So then, I think we covered this one, right? Schedule. All right, so jumping back into the slideshow, as I noted earlier, we had submitted the project evaluation forms to DEP and SRF. Those are the initial submission to the state, is the first part of the process to be funded. So we're anticipating the intended use plan to be published this winter, ideally in February. An important component to that, as it was explained to me from Nate Keenan of the Clean Water Trust, it is also at that time we should anticipate understanding what principal forgiveness we should get. So I know there was a comment earlier about debt schedules and understanding what the impacts of these projects are. To really understand it, we need to know what we're going to be obtaining for principal forgiveness, because that's ultimately what the debt schedules will be based off of. So I guess I would just ask for kind of patience as we wait for that information to come in. But it is my goal to have that all ironed out and well understood for spring. We'd be looking to move to town meeting for construction funding in May. Obtaining any required easements and funding is it's a requirement of submitting the SRF application. So once we get authorization in the spring, would be submitting the official SRF application for funding next September, October, hoping to bid for the Route 28 project February of '24, barring any delays on Mass DOT's side. Construction tentative May 24 to 25. Big unknown in there, supply chain. As I mentioned earlier, waterworks material, we're 50 weeks out for 12-inch ductile iron pipe. So at a year lead time, we're not exactly sure how that's going to impact the project. One comfort I got from the meeting with Mass DOT was basically if we did this on our own in advance of DOT, they might not wait for us and they might pave anyway. By including it within their contract drawings, if a contractor experiences delays, it pushes their schedule. So it gives us a little bit more guarantee that it's going to get done. All right. So if we don't have questions further on Route 28, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to jump into Phase 3 update.
Thanks, Dan. So what we wanted to do is just give you an update on where we are in the design, talk a little bit about the project areas. We've tried to refine that for the project so we can figure out exactly where we're designing the sewers. Talk a little bit about the Route 39 that was added in, that was originally part of Phase 2, and now we're looking to incorporate parts of that into Phase 3. Dan's going to talk a little bit about Bascom Hollow. We'll both touch on the Waquasit Resort and their request to connect. A little bit about the flows and nitrogen removal and how we kind of develop that. Costs, and then the schedule. So I know it's a little hard to see in here, but the shaded outlined areas represent sort of the major focus areas of the project, essentially around pumping station locations, with the exception of Route 39. So Route 39 is a pink shaded area that's basically in the bottom center of the figure. And that was done because that's going to be actually the primary connection point for the main pumping station that's coming out of what we're terming Pleasant Bay East. And that will connect there, and then we were picking up, as I mentioned, some of those other neighborhoods that weren't done as part of Phase 2, capturing those as part of Phase 3. Oh, thanks, Dan. And then the large green shaded area is Pleasant Bay East. And then it would go to a pumping station that would be located off of the segment of Pleasant Bay Road that's between 39 and 28. And then what is yellow, but I can't really tell what color it is here, mustard. That's up by Wilma's Way, and so that there's a pumping station that Dan's been working with neighbors in that area to locate to serve those properties. And then we've been in discussions over in the Standish Woods area between Martha Eaton and Chestnut. Their town actually has an existing road easement, and we're looking to change that to a utility easement and possibly locate a pumping station there to serve that area by gravity. We're still working through the design. One of our design parameters is trying to keep all our sewers less than 20 feet. We will have some deep sewers to serve that, but we're trying to do it in order to minimize the number of pumping stations. But there is discussions in some of the areas where you don't see the little red lines, which are representing some of the sewer piping. There are portions of neighborhoods that will need potentially to have low pressure sewer to pick up the little tail ends of these because of topography, but in order to meet the nitrogen that we'll talk about later. So that's sort of the parameters of what we've been working at for our study area or our sewer service area. The next slide, a lot of words, not going to go through all of this, but essentially what we did is we looked at the water use data 2018 through 2020, 2021. And we used that to get some new flow estimates. We adjusted them based on the parameters that MEP has been using, 90% of that presuming being wastewater, the other 10% being irrigation and other uses. The 26.25 nitrogen concentration that's been expounded upon for a long time. We're using that as the basis for the nitrogen load calculation. We looked at the estimate of what the nitrogen load was from the Phase 2 Seward area, what we're projecting for the Phase 3 area, and then we decided in discussions with Dan that we really needed to, because the MEP studies stopped in, basically they were 2007 data, but there's been growth that's happened from 2007 to 2020. So what we tried to do is estimate what that growth was within the watersheds based on water use and properties that were developed based on assessors to calculate a nitrogen load, to create sort of a new target. So there was a target that was set. It's part of the watershed permit. I'll show you on the next table. And so this process was to kind of help step us through that. So we looked at the 2007. Then we, like I said, adjusted for the 2007 to 2020. Then we also made some assumptions that I'll talk about after the table about growth between 2020 and 2040, sort of our project area, knowing that there's the work that's going on with the CWMP update and the town planner. We still needed to make some approach so that we could move forward and keep this project moving forward. So if you want to go to the next slide. So,
Do you want the pointer?
sure.
The top button.
Great. So this column on the far left is the watersheds that we were looking at: Lower Muddy Creek, Upper Muddy Creek, Pleasant Bay, and Round Cove. This next column over was representing the nitrogen removal goals that were established as part of the watershed permit. So luckily, this whole area is in the Pleasant Bay watershed. It's part of the actual permit. So those were the numbers we're looking at.
And can I just ask a question?
Oh,
And those numbers are also based on the CWMP at the time?
Yes.
Those are the original numbers?
Yep.
Then what we did is we came up with an estimate of what we thought that growth was, and what we did is we looked at assessors, any property that was identified as being built after 2007 and then had water use from basically 2007 to 2020. We figured out what that was and assigned a nitrogen load to come up with this next column that sort of set a new target. Then we said, okay, well, how much did you address as part of Phase 2? So we came up with the estimates for what was addressed as part of Phase 2 based on the 2020 values, 2020 water use. Then we looked at what we were anticipating picking up as part of Phase 3 to get a new total of what we're addressing. And then essentially we took this gray column and subtracted it from this gray column. And if we're negative, that meant we had removed at or beyond what we were looking to for nitrogen removal. Then, although it's cut off on the screen, so I apologize, we then determined what we projected for a future nitrogen load. And this last column, which you can't see, and I don't know that there's any way to
Move the
make it so
screen
that people can.
It's an important column.
It's a very important column, so
Let me know when to stop.
that's good, Dan.
Do good work, Dan.
So the last column basically says anything in red is indicating that you fall short of that projected goal. Now, it's important to note that based on what we're looking at sewering right now, you should be hitting those targets. This is to be determined. It's future growth. And the sewers can be extended as you go through your adaptive management and feel that, hey, we do actually need to do a little bit more in these areas to pick that up as you're watching the performance of your removals. So these aren't very big numbers at the end, so they're very close, but they are right now just shy of meeting that target as if you were doing the future. The other thing that the new rules that that DEP is looking to promulgate basically say your watershed permit's going to be eventually set so that you have to hit at least 75% of your total. So this is well below that, that threshold. So you would still be meeting that, but not going well over and beyond on something that you're not, that, you know, still could change.
More of a conservative.
So, if that, I don't know if anyone had any questions on that.
Larry, anything?
You guys are driving me crazy with these maps right now. But, how does the map you're showing this update, the areas that you're looking at, phase 3, how does that compare with the phase 3 that was originally drawn?
So the phase,
It looks like they're about the same, but I can't tell exactly.
They're very similar. So, I don't know, Dan, do you want to take the
Yeah.
remote and point?
so I guess the one, or the biggest difference between what we're proposing today and what was included in the original CWMP is we started out including phase 3 and the portions of phase 8 that were immediately adjacent to phase 3. So if you're looking at the old CWMP map, phase 8 had portions at the northern area of East Harwich, Great Sand Lakes, and then another section. This is just that contiguous East Harwich area.
That's interesting because the phase 8 was phase 8 at the time on the, not assumption, I guess, as much as a hope that we would never have to do that we would meet our goal without phase 8.
Right.
So moving that up is sort of interesting to me,
Yeah.
rather than move into other areas, and so that
Well,
was
at
part
this
of my,
point,
yeah.
I don't know that we would hit without including, and you see those, these red boxes over here, you know, are indicating that we're not, even with everything being proposed, we're achieving our baseline nitrogen removal requirements. We're capturing growth that's occurred since 2007 when those numbers were derived.
So your calculation, to interrupt you, your calculation is we need phase 8 to meet the goals at this point.
Yes, and one thing that, just for clarification, and it's, at least in the Pleasant Bay Alliance watershed permit we have today, that states that we are to remove these nitrogen removal requirements in the leftmost column, plus all new growth. And there isn't much guidance, and they have not given us much guidance on what all new growth means, but we have come to understand it as, since those numbers were developed in 2007, any new house that was built outside the contiguous sewer area need to be accommodated, and that nitrogen loads needs to be removed within that sewer area. So that's one of the things that we tried to accomplish through this evaluation, so that in a perfect world, we don't have to come back to East Harwich.
And my second question is the Huckleberry path area that you deleted now. Why would you not leave that in and delete some of the other phase 8, since we already, those people, I think, were already notified that they were going to be sewered?
It's in the wrong watershed.
Yeah, it's primarily in the watershed
So
that
Chatham
you're.
won't take it at this point.
No, Chatham would take it, but it's not in, it's in Lower Muddy Creek, sorry.
Lower Muddy Creek,
So it's
yeah.
in Lower Muddy Creek, where we've already hit our permitted nitrogen removal requirements. The phase 3 area as presented targets Round Cove and Pleasant Bay watersheds. So where we've already hit our permitted removal for Lower Muddy Creek, acting on the direction that we're only sewering what we need to, couldn't recommend adding that
Well-
in, if you will.
Well, that's one issue with, or not issue, but I don't know what you call it. A change in
Right.
using the targeted watershed plan is that actually is looking at, it's a more precise look than the CWMP.
Right.
We did not separate out Upper and Lower Middle Creek in those watersheds in the
Right.
CWMP.
Right,
So that's the explanation you have for doing that, because
yes.
people are not going to understand that, they're being deleted.
CWP is at 30,000 feet, the targeted watershed management
Is-
plan
we
is
have
like
the-
10,000.
You have the four you're showing here that we didn't separate that out at the time, but it's still gonna be an issue that people are gonna feel left out since they already were looking at it.
I'm already starting to kind of get,
What would the cost implications be if they were included?
well, we would need to amend Special Town Meeting Article 1 to get the ability to acquire property interest back on the warrant. And then I'd have to get back to you on a price to add the street. That said, the sewer main on 39 is being configured to accommodate that street and any adjoining streets. You know,
If
we're
we want,
sizing it.
if we want to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Julie?
Yeah, I have multiple questions on that, because obviously there's Huckleberry, there's my street, so full disclosure, I live on Old Carriage Drive. But those two coming out, which were originally part of the plan, plus the fact that we're then talking about putting Bascom Hollow on and possibly Wacquasit, and then going back to understanding, I do understand your numbers, but to Larry's point, a lot of people won't understand that. And I would say that, looking at that, you're coming by that whole neighborhood, and we don't even know what we're gonna be dealing with in the future with water. So to me, you know, we're dealing with nitrogen now, but we all know water is gonna be our next thing. Nobody likes roads dug up twice, and so I don't really see a point in skipping these neighborhoods. Other people in my neighborhood and the other neighborhood may feel differently, but I'm looking at it from the town's perspective, and what's the best use of our funds, and what's the most complete way to address these issues. Prior to, and again, I understand why Bascom Hall is being brought on Board of Health, never mind it is new development since, so I understand that, and I understand the numbers. But I think it's not part of the plan the way we originally designed it, and it makes the most sense to get the biggest bang for our buck, not only nitrogen, but for what we face for the future, so.
And I don't disagree. I guess the one of the things that led me to that decision, if you will, with the, I can go back to the map. So, this bottom one here is half of Bay Road that didn't get finished under Phase 2. This neighborhood here is Vicksburg and Williamsburg. Half of that wasn't finished. Across the street, Bascom Hollow, under order from the Board of Health. The unique thing about Huckleberry Path that's different from all those is that it will need a pump station. And the pump station's gonna be to the tune of $1 million on top of the, you know, just the cost of the pipe. So that was kind of my, at least justification, to your point, judicious use of the funds, you know, acknowledging that this project has escalated considerably in price since when we were talking about it last year, trying to kind of hit things where we have to. But I'm not opposed and happy to include it if that's, you know, the direction.
And I totally understand that. You have to look at it from the numbers that you have to be driven by, and I understand that. So no criticism of you at all, just really about how to most effectively pick up these areas and do it in a way that we can say, we've got it, we won't be back, you know, and we're reducing numbers, because if we also have to worry about growth in the future, more money, you know, some
Right.
nitrogen in the bucket and money saved, right? Because none of this is gonna get cheaper either,
Right.
But there is you know, if there's the opportunity or another project, if you say like, I don't know, water or something else, another utility is coming down the line, you could look to partner those projects as well, even if you didn't do it now. So, as Dan said, it's not being eliminated such you could never do it, it's just we were trying to judiciously.
Yeah, but the
Those
fact
spots.
that we just dealt with National Grid and the upgrade that we went through for, you know, what, 5 years? And, you know, that road was dug up and then it was dug up again. And so I'm just looking to say, ultimately, even though it's gonna cost us some money, it's, I think, a more complete overview of that particular area. And in the long run, it's probably gonna save us money, because we, you know, if the utility has to dig it up and do stuff, then they have to pave it and pay. But if it's us doing it, it's on us.
Yeah, I would like to see it, another look, and just so we know for sure what the the pump station you talk about, that's because it's gravity fed or it's independent?
The topography of the neighborhood drops off from 39. For Phase 2, we'd originally conceived of a pump station on road edge at the cul-de-sac. I've talked with the property owner there. That's, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this, probably not a viable pump station site.
Problematic.
Yes. Which drove me to the Sadie's Way pump station locations that were originally in Article 1. Happy to explore that and come back with an updated, cost estimate if that's the board's desire.
I like to explore so we know for a fact where we are.
Yeah, and with Bascom Hollow, I believe that they've got to have some open space, right, because of the way they were developed. And
Yeah.
Granted, we don't have a planner, but I believe that's how it was dedicated, different areas of open space. So Sadie's backs up to Bascom. I mean, maybe there's a possibility of something like that where it's a joint effort, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, we just have to, we'll have to look at property ownership, easements and things like that, but it's certainly, I don't know if we go to the next slide, yeah.
Just briefly, the forward thinking, I like the growth, adding the growth in. I would agree with Julie. I don't see the point in going by roads and not picking them up. Dan, we've had many conversations. Today's order is not tomorrow's order with DEP, as we just learned. They approved a 40-year plan for the town of Harwich and then told us, by the way, we're thinking of kicking 20 years off of that. And what we're having to remove today is nitrogen. We all know that eventually we're gonna be removing a lot more than nitrogen, and the only way to do that is through sewering. So for me, I know it's a big pill to swallow for the taxpayers. We are hopefully gonna qualify for some of the infrastructure funds and debt forgiveness, but I don't know why we would even consider going by roads just because we met what they told us to meet in 2007 science. It makes no sense to me.
So if you weren't able to secure a pumping station location, would there be any objection to this area being sewered by low pressure?
No, that was my question. Could we
Because
do
that
it
would
by
be,
low pressure
you could
and do it that
certainly
way?
do that,
and build it into it,
Yeah.
same way we're doing on Route 28?
Then we don't need an easement.
That was my point
Cheaper.
exactly.
Well, I think we should look at the cost for sure, but is there a possibility that we can't secure a pumping station?
I mean, I think the
Keeping in
town,
mind, if we have to
Yeah,
have
the
it,
town,
we
I've-
have to have it.
yeah, I would say the town has the right to take, an easement as needed. I've been trying to keep these as friendly as possible,
If we need it, we need it,
Right,
because we have to protect our water.
Yeah.
So, and
And-
forward thinking, which we weren't doing a long time ago, when Chatham built their facility for no money, we don't wanna do that again.
And if I may, because the timing is a little less sensitive, it's still important, but less important than it is for 28. We do need to have, as I mentioned before, funding and easements to apply for the final SRF loan application. We could, if we can't do it this fall, do the easement in the spring town meeting when we request construction funding. And so long as we are able to close the deal on the easement before construction, it wouldn't hinder the overall project schedule. So if not, I think this fall, we could still accomplish in the spring.
Thank you.
Michael, just,
Go ahead.
my point may not have been understood. My point is that even if we could get the site for the pumping station, it may make financial sense to use the grinder pumps,
Agreed.
one or the other.
Let me find my sliding. Cover growth?
The only thing I was gonna touch on is, so when we projected growth, essentially, we had to look in two areas. We had to look growth inside our watersheds for sizing purposes, but we had to look at, inside our sewer shed areas, our sewer service areas, and then we had to look in the watershed as well. And essentially, we just built off of zoning. Luckily, essentially almost all of the zoning up there, I think, is residential 40,000. So we essentially looked at a property and did a gross estimate of how many parcels could be done, not based on the geometry of the parcel, but literally just square feet, to come up with that. It's not a large number, but that was part of the analysis for developing that growth, just so.
Actually, can I just comment on one thing that I meant to say earlier, which is specifically back to that area, the couple areas removed, is that whole area is the overlay, the Water Protection Overlay District. So if there's any place that we should be looking and thinking about water, it's there.
Our health director would be applauding. So we did kind of talk about Bascom Hollow in passing, but just for those just tuning in or who haven't been following along, Bascom Hollow was constructed prior to Phase 2 going in, under the condition that the septic systems would tie in to Phase 2 once it became available. Due to the bid overrun, sewer did not extend up to Bascom Hollow, so this is just kind of a formality to just make sure we want to pick them up as we go by to meet the order of the Board of Health and avail them from having to install innovative alternative on-site septic systems. So,
And they have stubbed that to the, they come to the road, right? That's,
I
their
believe they do.
responsibility is to the road.
I believe it is. All right, on to the next. So after,
Dan, we just verify that for me at some point?
yeah, I have all Katie sent me everything on there, so I'll just follow up with that, sure. So shortly after town meeting this past fall for the Phase 3 design article, Waquasit had approached me inquiring about connecting into the Phase 3 sewers. As I explained to them, our sewering program did not propose to go that far down Pleasant Bay Road. In discussions with them, we've been conceptualizing a potential force main from the end of our, sorry to go back to the map, but
You had it in front of you before.
so our pipe's looking to stop here. We would be looking to include a force main. It would come down, and their septic or treatment plant is right over there. In discussions that I've had with them so far, we did include also, just for full transparency, in the nitrogen removal calculations that we looked at just a minute ago, did include Waquasit, did include the other streets that we've been talking about including, so that was a comprehensive table. So we would be gaining about 170 kilograms per year credit from picking Waquasit up. By including Waquasit, they would be able to decommission their on-site treatment plant, which would free up some real estate for them. In the discussions we've had, I've held the position that where we weren't intending to go down that far, any costs associated with tying them in should be borne on Waquasit. That said, by including them within our overall project, they would realize some benefits from the principal forgiveness that we may get. So right now, we're hoping to see somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 35+% principal forgiveness, whereby if we were able to include this force main as part of our project, they would realize the savings. They would be able to decommission their treatment plant, which frees up real estate for them, and we would have, a 40,000 gallon per year customer, which would help stabilize things from a revenue perspective. There's kind of pros and cons all the way around. What we would look to do, if the board is willing to engage further in evaluating this option, look to fully evaluate the flows, because we just talked about Great Sand Lakes a month or so ago. We have Phase 3, we now have Waquasit, as well as Phase 2. So I'd like to do a whole comprehensive review just to verify we don't have any flow concerns with Chatham. I don't believe there's any issues with the IMA to include Waquasit, because they're within the Little Pleasant Bay subwatershed, which is a contributor to Greater Pleasant Bay. So I guess really at this point, I'd like to see the board's consensus on.
Picking up Waquasit, what does that do for nitrogen removal in that watershed?
That's the 170 kilograms that we would get, so
So what percentage is that of the overall we have to remove?
So, out of the revised estimate, which we have for the 1860, that is the 170
Okay.
of that.
And 30 to 40,000 gallons?
Yeah.
Which would go a long way towards operation and
Yeah,
maintenance.
and one of the reasons it's not a much bigger number is because right now they're treating the wastewater, so the nitrogen concentration's already lower than a traditional septic system, so it's not as big a bang for your buck as if it was non-treated, but it is still pretty significant.
That's unfair. They should use the numbers before they.
Well, and to my last point, we're gonna be removing a lot more eventually from the water, and that is right on the water. It makes perfect sense to me to pick them up, or to at least explore picking them up on our way by.
And just,
And they're offering to pay a significant part of that as well, it looks like, in your table.
I haven't-
Go to the next.
yeah, I haven't negotiated. I've kind of held the position that, in my opinion, where we were not intending to do this, it was my opinion that they would be, the ones to pay
That's the
for it.
discussion.
Yeah, but the actual negotiation would take place, you through Joe, with them, yeah.
Julie?
So I just have a follow-up on that. So what does that do to us? Where does that get us in terms of we've got our max that we can send to Chatham?
300,000.
Right, 300. So if we were to pick them up, plus
Yeah.
work through the phase that we just discussed, which is not to exclude the others that have been dropped, where does that get us to that flow? Are we anywhere?
I have to add everything in now, this,
Yeah,
and really, we have to come back with that, especially with adding Huckleberry Path, Sadie's Way, Waquasit. It would be best to come back with a full.
that's fine.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, though, like, here we are, where we've had neighborhoods receive the same information, WIDA and the other one I can't blank it on. And I want us to be careful at looking at our phasing, what we disseminated for information, understanding numbers change, and as we've all talked about, those numbers are not gonna be the numbers for tomorrow. But we also have to think, here's Waquasit, that they may get some savings, even though they're gonna pay for their hookup. They may get savings through the loans.
Yeah.
But if we were to leave these other neighborhoods off and eventually then make them connect later, that's gonna cost them more. And they're not gonna get any savings from the loans. So I just want us to collectively keep all of that in mind, because at the end of the day, we put out all this information, we talked about our phases, we said this is how we were gonna do it, and we certainly don't wanna go past these other places that have already been developed. And they, I believe, in your information, have an interest in doing this as well, not only which we do benefit from, and the water quality benefits from, which is a bonus, but they also want to develop more.
Right.
And so here we are talking about people who are already in situations that their houses have been built, and we're trying to address those before we talk about giving somebody a little bit of a credit on a loan, plus develop more. So let's address what we have on the ground now, even if they were gonna pay for the whole thing.
Mhm.
That's just my point of view.
You do agree that it's worth having the conversation?
Totally agree, yeah. And I don't have a problem with it. I'm just saying there's a lot of factors that need to be factored into the decision as to whether or not that's the best for us in terms of our flow, in terms of our current, homeowners who were already given information, and the fact that we don't want to have to go back to this neighborhood. That's a whole separate area, right? We're not talking about digging up and going past and then coming back. That's just digging up to connect them from A to B, which hasn't been dug up yet anyways. So just saying, let's just continue to keep all of those pieces, because there's a lot of moving parts, and I know you know it better than anyone, because you're constantly having to look at this and then incorporate that, but I just think that we need to remember what we rolled out, remember who's affected by it, and remember the long-term goal. And it's not to just, I know we need the money, but we also want to be careful. We don't want to get too close to meeting that flow, or we're back to square one of having to build our own plant. So,
Larry?
But I think we're in favor of moving ahead with the discussions. What do you need from us to, just
Well, I
a,
think the appropriate next step right now is to just do a full comprehensive review of the flow, just for phase 2, phase
Right.
3, the streets we talked about, re-including Great Sand Lakes, and then Wequasit. I don't want to speculate, what that's going to look like, though I believe we'll be within 300, but I don't want to say too definitively.
Yeah, phase 2 didn't get us over 100.
Right.
So we have 200,000 gallons we're talking about. So,
And that's,
I don't want anyone listening or that's gonna read about this later to think we're close,
Right.
because we're not close. And that's not even related to the slow hookup rate on phase 2.
Right.
That's if everybody hooks up. We're still under 100,000 gallons.
right. And just a couple things just on Wequasit.
But we're paying for 300. That's a second important part of this.
Yeah.
We are paying for 300 with Chatham.
Yeah, and one thing I did, we've had a handful of conversations back and forth, and they did bring up the concept of flow and, a desire in the future potentially to request more flow. My discussions that I've had to date with them, as well as anyone else who's asked that question, is we're too early in the sewer system to be giving away flow at this point. It would, I would want to see a decent percentage, to really understand the actuals before we start increasing anyone's allotment.
So Joe, without a motion, the consensus of the board is to continue conversation at very least with the Wequasit, probably with your presence.
And thank you. If I could build on that, I think to that consensus and to really what Dan and the team are getting to tonight is tonight's comprehensive effort to bring all these issues to the forefront is because we're still committed to transparency. When we talked 2 years ago prior to COVID about how certainly Dan and I were going to take the approach on our comprehensive wastewater management plan. So we've been doing work in the background. Well, now it's time for this to come out to the foreground. And to that end, Dan, I would just ask for the benefit of people at home, I also want to make sure we go through all the slides that are in the deck so that no one thinks we're, skipping past the key discussions. And as Dan said, the next step would be to continue to evaluate. We've gotten great direction from you, the board, and yes, we can have follow-up conversations with neighborhoods, resorts, and others to find out what's next.
And I'm gonna turn it over to Jeff to discuss some of the pricing stuff for Wequasit. Before I do, one thing that, when we talk about the principal forgiveness, we talk about Wequasit, even if Wequasit's paying for this, right, or, in the estimate on the screen here is 1.5 million. When I talk about getting potentially 35% principal forgiveness, one important thing I want everyone to carry forward from here to town meeting is after principal forgiveness is applied, after Wequasit pays us, the loan that's actually going to impact our tax rate may be somewhere near $30 million. But we are going to have to appropriate the full amount as if we got no principal forgiveness, as if Wequasit wasn't paying us back. So that cost that Jeff's going to get into after Wequasit is all encompassing. That's what we need to ask at town meeting, and then that will be reduced by principal forgiveness and things like that. But just so that that's kind of understood.
So we did it.
Michael,
Larry? Joe, go ahead.
And sorry, before you go too far on that, I think, but to Dan's point, as we have these slides up and we're talking about the new element of Wequasit, one of the things that I could put out there hypothetically is, as we have these discussions going forward, the town might want to contemplate asking players of that size and nature and council if there's an opportunity to perhaps put money in escrow. So rather than seek reimbursement, there may be a way for us to have the money in hand available so that it's not a wish and a prayer in the future. And again, that's just a hypothetical that may come out of some further negotiations or discussions.
Thank you, Joe.
Do you want the floor?
Sure, just in case I need it. So we did a couple gross estimates for Wequasit, looking at a couple different scenarios. So the scenario presented here was included cost of actually having them build on Route 28. They have the opportunity, if they decided to do things on their property and run force mains and things like that, to avoid, minimize they're gonna have to be on 28, or that force main from their facility is going to have to cross 28. So there's a cost associated with that. So this presumed that there was that. This also presumed that the town would bring gravity up to basically the high point by Pleasant Bay Court. It's more of a maintenance issue for the town. Like, if you're gonna take the wastewater, it's better to pump uphill than to pump uphill and then back downhill. So you would pump to a gravity, and then we would be looking at the design of that to just see what we can serve by gravity. Topography is kind of weird at the top of the hill, but so that if you did want to connect other places in the future, or there was a need to connect other places in the future, your sewer will be designed accordingly. But that would be the approach for this. If we had them pump all the way down, the cost would be higher. If they pumped further down the road, if they stayed on their property, it might be less. There's assumptions for police and survey and other items, and the design. It's presumed that there's going to be design associated with the work that would be incorporated into the town's plans, but there's also their design work. So we're not carrying any of the costs for building the pumping station. If I remember correctly, I think this is literally just the force main coming over and the design associated with that, but doesn't include the work that they would have to do to design, build, and whatever for their pumping station on their property. Just to be clear on that. So I think
Towards the computer.
sorry. Then what we did as part of the project evaluation form is we had to come up with an estimate for the overall project, and broken into various different pieces. And this was presuming, we hadn't gotten very far into design. We had some segments of deep sewer in certain places.
6 pump stations.
We had 6 pumping stations. So there's provisions for cost savings if we do more areas where we're doing some low pressure sewer extensions as opposed to putting in a small pumping station. So we're working through those pieces. This is basically to set the ballpark of what the state would be funding. And then it goes through the intended use plan. They'll list it as eligible funds that would cover your construction contingency, your police details, utility, any utility costs or other costs that might be with the project, and construction phase services. This does not include the money that you've already appropriated for the design of the project. So they don't fund that, so that's also not captured in here as part of this project. So we're working through that, but this was the ballpark. And then as we go through and update the costs, we'll be updating the town as we move forward based on decisions that are made here. And then a new cost will be presented, and then ultimately we would present another cost that would be the part of the actual SRF application for the actual, starting the ball rolling for the loan.
Any questions, Julie?
Just one question. In that number, it says, GHD is working to evaluate sewer depths, pressure sewer areas, and small pumping stations for some areas. So I imagine the pumping stations and all of that aren't included in, are they?
No, so the pumping stations are included in here. What we're trying to evaluate and what we haven't done is, for example, the discussion we were having on Sadie's and Huckleberry. The difference between putting a pumping station there or serving that area by low pressure sewer. There are some areas that are up in the Standish Woods area that there are some properties that may just always have to pump just based on the design of the house, where their septic system is, where there's, so they're deep and they're set back from the road. But there are other places where there might be the opportunity of a small pumping station, but then it comes into the cost balance that the town will sort of have to make a decision on. Low-pressure sewer is cheaper than gravity. Just if you're looking just at the sort of the pipe installation cost alone, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide, it's almost, half or less. And then there's the cost of the pumping station. So there's a trade-off there, and it'll get down to a town decision on how much do you want to carry to serve various different areas. So that's what that paragraph's intended to say, that we're still working through to get to a point where we can actually present that information to Dan and then the board.
And that 48.9 million number that's on the slide is an old number. You know what I mean? That was what we submitted back in August. That included the 6 pump stations. We hadn't had a chance to value engineer. Survey data's been coming in, so we've been trying to work the gravity to minimize pump stations. So I don't want to say definitively, because they'll probably throw me out the window, but I'm optimistic the price will go down given some of the work that we've been doing, but that's to be
Okay.
forthcoming.
Thank you.
Larry?
No, I'm fine.
So I know this slide is very hard to read.
I'm going to say impossible.
Yeah, impossible to read. The intent of this slide was to show, for an example, essentially the cost difference of 2 projects that GHD had done for your neighbor, Town Chatham. One was bid in 2019, one is bid in 2022. So the unit prices and the way that they're described are essentially the same. And with the exception of paving, which was a little less, everything else was 25% to, over 2 times, more. So I apologize, the last column says percent increase. It really should just say percent change, and really what you'd do is just, instead of putting in a percentage, look at it as a decimal. So it'd be like, if it's 112%, it's 1.2 times the value of whatever it was before. So you can see that the values range from, press the wrong button. Somewhere over here, it's, 12, but the next item down, which is gravity sewer, between
8 and 12 feet.
8 and 12 feet. That's 2.3 times the 2.3 times the bid cost. And these are average bid prices from multiple bids. And some of them were even the same. In most cases, we had at least 3 of the same contractors that had bid both projects. So that tells you that not only is it just that massive increase that everyone's seeing in pretty much everything, it's very prevalent. And so what we tried to do is point out a lot of the piping materials, because those were a lot of the big ones. This wasn't obviously the whole thing, but that was the intent of this slide. Hopefully when it goes up on the webpage, people could actually zoom in and.
I think it says a lot. I mean, seeing, over 2 times the cost in 2019 to 2022, it's a lot.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, to that slide was building off of the 2019 bid that Chatham did, that was spot on.
If I remember
Correct.
correctly, yeah.
Meaning it was within the margin of error. So when you take good data, you're now seeing the true impact of everything we're dealing with supply chain and inflation.
But if I may, that actually, you mentioned this before, the timing of when we get the town meeting vote and we get the SRF funding. There's a previous projects we got in trouble, probably for some reason, but one of them was we went in with a 50% design estimate. And that's what people can believe should be the final price, and went way up. So will this go into town meeting at 90%, or that, not a bid, but you feel you won't actually have bid in hand?
Yeah, this is.
So one of our conclusions after that experience was always go in with bids in hand. But you can't do that and get SRF funding.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
We can go in as 90%, so we should be better off than we.
Our intent is to,
before it costs.
yeah, to go through, the process, and as Dan alluded to, we're getting the survey, so now we can finalize, as we get the survey, we can finalize the actual sewer design, and that will allow us to really know where we are in the depths, and then we still escalate these values, so we're gonna take the values that we're seeing in 2022, we're using those, and then we're still escalating, so the values that we were presenting in the PDF were escalated to an estimated midpoint of construction.
And-
So there's,
And that's my point. I'm making a point in all this is that you need to keep on schedule to come with a 90%.
Right.
Because I think what happened before is they fell behind the schedule and ended up with a 50%, which then we had all the negative repercussions that we all know about.
yeah, it is, as Dan and I discussed, it's not a pleasant bidding atmosphere right now. But that doesn't mean that it won't change, but we'll just, that's kind of where we are right now. There's a lot of projects, but, hopefully the contractors are gonna continue to gear up. But it's just sort of the way of the world right now, so we're doing our best to refine these costs. Good. And did you want to talk about the schedule?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So in terms of the schedule, we submitted the project evaluation form in 2022. We're anticipating the intended use plan, the IUP, to come out. Usually it's the end of February, but it's been as late as middle of March. It used to come out at the end of January, so who knows where it'll be. And that will establish, where you are on the schedule. And then that'll lead us into town meeting in May of '23. And then normally the SRF application would be submitted, it's due October 15th. Our intent is to be done design, be in a good place for the cost estimate, go to town meeting, have you get the funding secured, and then submit the application as soon as we can after that, such that, presuming we have all our other paperwork in line, so that we can be actually in advance of the October 15th. And then hopefully that'll allow us to either bid late summer or early fall to start construction and take advantage of the fall construction period. Most of the time, the communities have found that the contractors have been willing to work through the winter for the most part, the advantage of being on Cape. So.
You can work, actually.
And then I think I'll throw it over to Dan for the watershed permit discussions.
All right, any talk on phase 3 before I jump into watershed requirement?
We're good.
All right. So I think we talked about the proposed DEP watershed permit regulations in brief previously. There hasn't been a ton of new information. I have sat through a handful of the same discussions with DEP, but there hasn't been a ton building off of the initial conversation. So what I know today is the proposed regulatory framework looks to expand the definition of a nitrogen-sensitive area to include natural resource area, natural nitrogen-sensitive areas. Now, to try to decode that, as you noted, East Harwich is currently a water protection district. That's because it is a nitrogen-sensitive area. It is designated that way for drinking water purposes. This proposed regulations looks to amend the definition, so it's not just going to be for drinking water, it's also going to be any area contributing to a watershed or sub-embayment that has a TMDL, which all 5 of ours do. So that's one of the biggest changes. Now, with that, there's an upcoming comment period. They have been saying that they're going to be doing comment period through this winter, looking to adopt the regulations in the spring. So they're looking at a pretty aggressive schedule. They do propose 2 options for compliance. The do-nothing option, if you will, would subject us to the revised Title V regulations, which any property with a TMDL will have to replace their on-site existing septic systems with an innovative alternative one for all new and existing construction within 5 years of adopting the regulations. The alternative option is the watershed permit option, which allows the town, we have to submit a permit or obtain a permit within 5 years of the effective date of the nitrogen sensitive area designation or natural resource area designation. Then we'll have 20 years to mitigate or remove 75% of the total load impeding or impacting the subject water body.
So then if I may, the start point is when these regulations are finalized in,
Yes,
in terms of us submitting, then we have 5,
5 years. So if they
that was my
stick with their
question on one
schedule.
of the meetings we had, was when's the starting point?
Yeah, so it would be spring '23, they adopt the regulations. That would be, because we already have an EPA-approved TMDL, that starts the clock that we have 5 years to do something. To apply for a permit, once we apply for it, that's when the 20-year time starts. So it's almost 25 years. The first 5 years being giving municipalities, we're a little bit ahead of the curve because we have a CWMP. This gives communities an opportunity
Well,
within
that's
that
what
5
confused
years.
me. What was the impact of CWMP at their starting point?
Yeah,
I think it's important, Dan, to point out, though, that you do actually have, part of your town actually has a permit, so.
Right.
Pardon?
Part of Harwich already has a permit, so the Pleasant Bay
We're
Alliance.
in advantage on
yeah.
that. Unfortunately, we have other parts.
Yeah,
Four other-
exactly. So I just, for the audience, it's important to know that it's not
Right.
everywhere, because some of it is covered by your permit,
Yeah.
but it is a lot of the town.
yeah.
And actually, just again, for people at home, and I want to make sure I understood it correctly too, but, you know, depending on when these go into effect, if it's spring of 2023, then if you were going to either build something or even renovate, like do an addition, you would have to, so for example, if we took those two neighborhoods off, I'm just using them as
Continental and Witter, yeah.
yeah,
good
or,
example.
yeah, right, so you wanna go do an addition, and you think, well, I can meet the setbacks, I'm good zoning. Oh, yeah, but now you have to put in an IA system, correct? Just wanna make sure people
Yes.
understand that.
But it's worse than that,
Yeah.
because even if you're not looking to do an addition,
You're
you
still
have
gonna
do
have to
it
do
5
it,
years.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my follow-up, is
The point
regardless.
Option one's not a good
Yeah,
option.
which is what they told us, you know, when they just doled out you don't have 40 years, you have 20 years, and you're gonna do IAs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Now-
regardless, yeah.
The one bit of relief, and I think I might have noted it last time I was here, is, for example, Coldbrook. There are, so long as DEP approves of an alternative timeline, when they talked about that in the meeting, I said, well, what would constitute getting an approval? Because we have this wonderful Coldbrook attenuation project that we're looking to do, and it's gonna take some time for that to normalize after the construction. And they said, yeah, perfect, that's exactly what we're talking about as an avenue for an alternative timeline. So they will probably give us a 5-year extension for that one watershed. Now, we still have Allen Harbor, Witchmere, Saquatucket, Heron River, right? So we're still gonna be doing this all simultaneously, but I think we'll get a little relief at least on one of them.
On that, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So what does that mean for Harwich? We just talked about the Title V option, so I'm not gonna dig too deep into that. We did just talk about the watershed option. One of the things that DEP kind of touted is that the watershed permit option gives you an option for adaptive management. It gives you the opportunity to employ a greater range of solutions, which is true, because if we don't, we're stuck with IA septic systems, and that's the end of the road. So I tried to summarize some of, at least my initial concerns, as hopefully you'll have me be the person to try and implement this, should it all move forward. Some of the concerns I have, just starting off the bat, and it was already noted tonight, the regulatory agencies approved our 40-year plan in 2016, now coming back telling us we need to do it in 20. So obviously that's that's a big concern, especially given that these regulations are all born out of the 208 lawsuit. I don't believe that any of this was really unknown, because 208, if I'm not mistaken, predated a lot of this. So, ongoing permit management. I have a big concern with this, just based on the amount of work that I put in with Pleasant Bay Alliance and supporting all that effort. It's going to be difficult to try to do that simultaneously with 4 other watersheds on top of it. In addition to that, the Pleasant Bay Alliance has spent $618,000 in SNEP grant funds and in-kind matching from the town staff and cash from municipalities. You know, that's a pretty big contribution that we're now going to have to be looking at in the other watersheds. So cost is obviously a big factor. Implementation, shortening the timeline is going to result in more frequent, larger scale projects to try to meet this requirement, and it's going to certainly have an impact on the other capital needs of the town, which I think DEP needs to acknowledge that this isn't the only need that Harwich has, and that there needs to be room for us to do other important projects over the next 20 years as well. Contractor bonding capacity. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with how public works contracting works, but just as a quick summary, if I'm XYZ contractor, I'm approved by the bonding company to do $100 million of work at a time. Well, if there's $1 trillion of work on Cape Cod and every contractor only has $100,000 or $1 million worth of bonding capacity, there aren't going to be eligible contractors to do the work, which I think is kind of a big oversight. I've brought it to their attention already, but that's a big concern I have. Another one that is, and just to build on that, there's 30 watersheds on Cape Cod alone that are going to be subject to these new regulations, so it's going to be Cape-wide. Project funding and principal forgiveness. As you've probably heard me say, they haven't given us any information yet. I think the one number that I've heard from Mark as late as this evening was they're talking about 7.5% from the infrastructure bill on top of regular forgiveness for wastewater projects. But that's still a very nondescript principal forgiveness, and I've been trying to tell them, as the person who needs to sell this at town meeting, work with the town to develop the tax implications, the debt schedules, to try to get this home, it would be very helpful and beneficial to us in the town level to be able to articulate to the residents what sort of forgiveness we're going to get, and that would then allow us to lay out, you know, a 20 or greater year town of Harwich capital plan that would balance all of those things. So they're not really giving us all the tools that would be desired to get that done. And then just lastly, as I mentioned earlier, supply chain. While I don't expect and certainly hope it doesn't carry for the 20-year life of the permit, it is certainly an issue today, and I don't think it's going to be solved overnight. I expect, you know, probably 2 to 5 years of trying to get over the hump that was the last 3 years. So, happy to.
Thanks for the great news.
Seriously.
When does DEP finally come to this room and have this conversation as the regulatory board on their decision and all these unfunded mandates? Because you talk about going to town meeting to get the funding. You know, we've already sold town meeting on a 40-year, $240 million plan that's now well over $400 million. And now they're shortening the time frame by half. And you talk about bonding and contractors on Cape. Let's not forget that more than half of our contractors are taking jobs all over the state of Massachusetts. So they're gone, plus the supply chain. Plus, our plan was factored at a normal inflation rate, and we're nowhere near normal at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So when does DEP come before this board to explain where they come up with these non-reality scenarios that they're coming up with on IA systems, which, by the way, the last time they were in this room, they told us they didn't work.
Yeah.
So I don't get the memo that it actually works from them yet. And then I would say to the town administrator, at some point, we need to engage legal, because we can't just eat everything that they're serving and have the residents of this town actually survive. And to your point about other things the town needs, we already have a pretty healthy capital plan. And our budget has a trajectory line like this over the last X amount of years, and we haven't looked at a 5-year forecast in a while. So when do they come and explain where they come up with this stuff?
That's a good question. I can certainly reach out and inquire and see if we can schedule an opportunity for them to come down and discuss this, though I don't want them to come down and give the same presentation that I've pretty much summarized for you. So I think I can reach out and see how we can engage them for a real back and forth, because
I think at some point, Dan, they need to be met with some resistance because we cannot afford their timeline. And they haven't demonstrated that their suggestions even work.
Right.
Yeah, I've suggested, go ahead.
So, I hope everybody's paying attention, and I hope when the Chronicle writes this up, people really get fired up, because at some point, again, we cannot, as a town of Harwich, and I'm sure every town on the Cape, cannot afford what they're telling us we have to do. And I think that though we do have to protect our water, and that we do have to remove nitrogen, and we do have to show forward motion, there's only so much we can do at the worst time you can possibly do it.
Ever.
And I'm sure that they all live in a town that's facing similar things and not being able to hire contractors. So as much as I want to move forward on all of this, Dan, if we go to town meeting with 49 million here and 40 million there and whatever over 20 years, say goodbye to the rest of the residents that don't only share the greatness we have in the summertime. People will not be able to afford to live here.
I agree. I do.
Larry?
Yeah, I've, not jokingly, but maybe cynically, have argued that the Supreme Court did give us a handle to pull on recently with the West Virginia overstep of EPA, mandating requirements that were outside what was passed into law. I don't see why we aren't exploring some of that, not as Harwich, but as Cape Cod generally. Because
Someone's got to be a pioneer.
This is an overstep, I think, in any stretch of the imagination. And I'm not sure how they, I was reading today, I need to find better things to do. But Falmouth, I think, has also a targeted workshop management plan. And they've built into theirs a contingency. And basically it's contingency if something fails. And we have that on our Pleasant Bay Alliance, because they build into theirs, as you obviously know, so I'm preaching to the, using shellfish that may or may not be successful. It looks like now it's not going to be terrible. So you end up in a spot where you could get 10 years down the road, and it fails, and then they actually have a well thought out plan, then it has a costing for putting sewers in. There's no way DEP addresses the time extension then to do that. I don't know if DEP's thought through some of the details that they're asking us to do in a reasonable way.
Like how we pay for it.
Well, that's number one, because you take, we're a town of, what, 13,000, and we're talking, with the CWMP, over 40 years, we're talking over 300 million. I mean, now we do that in half, talking about debt schedules.
Yeah, I know, I'm scared, yeah.
To move this along, what's your ask on this, or was this just the ending bad news?
Yeah, there was kind of just,
Well played.
That works.
Well played.
I feel very satisfied.
but I'll reach out to DEP and see if I can't have them come down for a more colorful discussion than,
Colorful.
yeah, what we've had so far. Because I think we need to get out ahead of it as much as we can, because if they're talking adopting these regulations in spring of '23, I mean, might as well be here.
Well, and Larry spoke of the fight. I mean, I think, Joe, at some point we should engage the county as their resource of ours to get involved, so that all the towns are fighting together for what seems to me to be completely impossible.
Structure bill just was just eaten up by the inflation. I mean,
Question, I'm gonna get to the public in a minute, so.
the Gray Sounds Lake Pond project, you're gonna leave now, or can I make a comment on that?
Yeah, no, I was gonna stay through the end for that.
I'm gonna, is that
We'll
where you're
do
going?
this. Well, we'll go, let's finish this discussion, I'll
Okay.
come back to that.
Do you have anything on where we are so far?
No, I appreciate all the information. It's so extensive, so thank you.
Anyone in the public?
Yeah, thank you, Dan, for putting this forward.
Okay, go ahead, Dan.
For Great Sand Lakes.
Well, Mike, I have a concern on that because we're just again, going through some literature and, reading some, and, we're gonna sewer that to remove phosphorus to stop the cyanobacteria, the blooms. But we've never done a study on what the phosphorus allocation is in that pond. And we don't know what it is exactly, but if you go through some of the literature, the regeneration of phosphorus basically release some sediments. As you know, I'm telling you guys what you already know, but that can be account for 50–75% of the phosphorus that goes into the pond. So we could end up sewering that without solving the problem at all. I know it understands you have some oxygen profiles and stuff that affects that, and so somehow before we do that, or part of this process, we should be looking at what the phosphorus makeup is in that pond to see whether sewering has a fighting chance or not. We actually have a recent example of that at Skinniquin Pond, where they use aeration. Now you could argue, and aeration is an effective treatment, but solar bees, I think from day one, wasn't adequate to aerate that. But partly was probably because they didn't account for the phosphorus. It's easy to focus on the runoff and sewer, but until we have a study on that, I think we need, and I think that's short money compared to what you're talking about sewering. We should know we're doing the right thing, because there are some pretty good studies out there that say the best effective, if you really want to, maybe, I don't know this for a fact till we do it, maybe your best alternative is alum treatment followed by sewering.
Well, that's.
If we just do sewering,
Yeah.
and if we do that, just pull it out of the air without knowing where we're going, that concerns me. So I'd like to study that.
Well, I was glad you said that, because that was gonna be my response, was that, looking at Skinniquin, I was talking with the WASH, I forgot what the acronym stands for, but the watershed committee there for Skinniquin, and I just wrote a letter of support for their CPC application. I said exactly that, is that we're looking at developing a comprehensive nutrient management plan to encompass freshwater ponds as part of the CWMP revisions. A great intermediate and first step to a long-term permanent solution at Skinniquin is an alum treatment, because the alum binds to the phosphorus, it allows it to fall out of solution, and then it's no longer in concentration within the water. But if you don't address the source, then it's going to just keep raising the concentration.
And that's the
again.
point. I want to be sure we follow through on the Great Sounds Lake project, that we just don't go in blind without knowing what we're doing.
Whether or not it should be alum.
And
In
I want to be
concert
sure
with.
that's built into the, how we go forward.
Good, yeah.
Okay, Julie, anything?
No,
Any further?
I'm good.
Good.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Dan,
You have Sharon wants to speak.
hang on one second, Sharon. Dan, one thing, and then we're gonna start making this fairly clear to everybody, is any articles that we're contemplating for town meeting in May, we're gonna wanna start bringing those forward, because this board's not gonna do that 1 month before town meeting, airing everything out. And with wastewater stuff, it's very critical that we get it before all of the residents as many times and as early as we can. So
Agree
anything you're
100%.
contemplating, start drafting,
All right.
please. Sharon?
Sharon Flieger. I got a question for Dan, following up on what Mike said. If thinking of asking the DEP to come down here, maybe it would be better if we could get all the Board of Selectmen from the towns that are involved in one meeting with them. It might have more of an impact than just one town, because we're not going to be the only town that's up against this. So if we're going to get them down here, or at some meeting place, let's get our ducks in a row. And then I would also suggest maybe coming up with some questions that most of the towns are going to have the same questions. Give it to them so that when if they would show up, that they don't say, oh, we'll get back to you. Give them the questions ahead of time. Hopefully, they'll have some answers or some excuses or whatever. But I think having the towns together in one meeting, as many as you could get, is going to be more of an impact on DEP than just one town.
Sharon, any questions you have, get to me. We should start that. You're 100% right. We should start putting together questions.
Yes, yes. I really think that would, to get them down here without the questions, then what you're going to run up against is they're going to say, well, I don't know, we'll have to get back to you. Give them the questions ahead of time. But like I said, I also think we need more we need more the Board of Selectmen from the other towns. I think it'll make an impression on them. Just a
If I
thought.
may,
I'll do anything.
Go ahead, Larry.
Well, and my impression is that, and I don't know this for a fact at all, so take it for what it's worth, that DEP is being pressured into this by CLF and by others, and so anything we can do to give them ammunition, it doesn't necessarily have to be adversarial.
Right.
My sense is they're probably on our side, at least to some extent. So we need good questions, Sharon, as you're saying, to build up a case that they can argue as well.
I think there's a mutual goal that we all share and DEP all shares. It's just finding a harmonious way to get there that I think we need to get to.
I actually thought they'd leave us alone since we've proven good faith.
I was hoping that
Yeah.
because we had an approved CWMP, that would be considered an approved alternative timeline.
And we're moving ahead,
Yeah,
but there you go.
so. And I guess one more thing. I started almost 7.5, almost 8 years ago, and we were just doing the final course of asphalt on Continental and Witta. And that was about 500 houses, started right after the failed town meeting vote. But I think about that in terms of trying to do the rest of the town in 20 years.
I'm
mean,
just
it took
happy that my house is
7 years.
not vibrating.
Yeah, it took 7 years to get 500.
Right,
You know, how long it's gonna take to get another 6,000?
exactly. No, that's true.
All right, now you're out of here. Thank you. G, Joe, discussion and possible vote to approve the Barnstable County
So-
ARPA grant sub-award agreement.
On behalf of Dan Pelletier's memorandum in the packet, I can tell you what that is. So as you know, GHD and Dan have been working on the town's project for the ARPA funds from Barnstable County to Harwich. That's the $616,000 plus dollars. And so it's again for the Great Sand Lake Sewer design. So we're now at the point where the board has to, excuse me, vote to approve the subaward agreement, which is in your packet, that is written by the county. So I can tell you that this has been vetted by council, it's recommended that you do that. And then if you do that, the next step would be that I would be submitting on behalf of the town as the requestor, and eventually Anne Marie Ellis would be following up on information as the record keeper. So we do ask that you approve the Barnstable County ARPA grant subaward agreement as contained in your packet.
So that was kind of like the motion. Does anyone move that?
Do you want me to?
No, I think we can say so moved on that. That was a long motion.
Yep, I would agree.
So, second.
So moved, and you're seconded it?
Second, yeah.
Okay, great. Any further discussion?
I just will restate what I told Dan. I want to be sure we study it before we start, assuming we get the grant that we.
So we certainly can, but there is a time frame, I think, through June 30th, 2024.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 3-0. Town administrators, contracts, and we'll need motions on these contracts.
Let's see, I move that we approve and sign the Campbell Construction Group LLC for the foundation repairs and renovations to the Brooks Academy Museum in the amount of $1,189,000.
Second.
Moved in second. Any discussion? Joe?
Just, I know the hour is late, but this is great news for the town. As you know, we had to rebid because earlier in the spring it was not successful. We had a more active bid process And great news of all, it comes in within the budget that we have. So this will ensure that a key project for a key building will be able to stay on track.
Thank you, Joe.
I'm not sure we have that one in our,
So the only thing I would note is on that contract, the procurement checklist, the revised procurement checklist is not in the packet.
So I will tell you, I believe for at least 2 of these 3 contracts, we are waiting for signatures from the finance director.
Okay.
okay.
Going forward, I know we voted several times to make sure that's in the packet, so can we get copies as soon as that's signed?
Absolutely.
And then not bring these forward until we have it, please.
So if I could explain that, Mr. Chairman, we didn't want to put the project in jeopardy, waiting on that final signature. So I did make an executive decision, but I understand where you're coming from.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 3-0. Next one, Julie, B, Dirtworks. That's all right.
Move that we approve and sign the MCE Dirtworks Incorporated for roadway construction items and materials in the amount of $200,000.
Second, although I think they come with a better word than.
Discussion, Larry? Any, no discussion?
No discussion.
Julie?
None.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 3-0. And then, last C, it's all right.
See. Authorize the chair to sign the land grant award from Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. And do we want to say exactly where this is from? Because it's in regard to our Six Ponds Great Woods CR project. So that's part of my motion.
That's part of your
Okay,
motion.
second.
Part of Larry's second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 3-0. Town Administrator's report.
In the interest of time, good night.
Selectmen's report, Julie?
I don't have anything.
You don't have anything on the witches on the wall?
Oh, Witches on the Water, yes, oh my gosh, thank you for reminding me. So we had this amazing event, it was supposed to be a paddleboard parade for Witches on the Water, and the rain came and the witches didn't melt. We went to the community, the Monomoy
into flame,
Regional
right?
Middle School on Saturday. And when we walked in the door, we had already raised $15,000. So I don't know what the total is going to be because the auction, the raffles were amazing. Michael donated a fantastic paddleboard, and the woman had 2 little kids, and she stayed through the whole thing, and she won. So that was really cool.
Nice.
So yeah, what a great event, and it all of the money stays on the Cape. This year, it was going to Cape Wellness Collaborative, which helps, cancer patients with food and acupuncture and all sorts of amazing things. So money well donated to our community.
Excellent.
Congratulations.
Larry, Selectmen's report?
I'm going to echo Joe. Good night.
Yep. Good night. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 3-0.